Hogwarts. Voldemort, don't stop me from studying. Chapter 81. Vader froze everything and stepped into the messy classroom, carefully stepping on areas that were not contaminated by dung bombs. Then he restored the cockroaches and spiders to their original sizes and watched the helpful insects scurry into the cracks in the corners of the wall. Looking up, someone even looked grateful to him for this. Vader was speechless for a moment. Looking at the ground, the walls, and the bodies of Malfoy and others, there were remnants of dung bombs everywhere. Green smoke was rising from the broken glass, and the ground was corroded by something, making a hissing sound. The Slytherins were petrified in various struggling postures. Some were crying with snot and tears all over their faces, some were so frightened that their eyes were straight, and some were covered in red, swollen and terrible scabies for some unknown reason. They all looked painful. Only Daphne in the corner was slightly better. She was not injured, but she was also frightened and had a few spider threads stuck to her body. Vader not only had questions in his mind, this is it. He thought that Malfoy had prepared a dragnet, and that's why he dared to cause trouble again after suffering a loss last time. Unexpectedly, he just wanted to rely on people to ambush him. Vader thought about himself. He had prepared a dozen spells and specially practiced 5 different combinations. In order to be able to successfully cast the spell in the shortest time and attack while on the move, he practiced privately in the Room of Requirement for a long time. The Room of Requirement only provided wooden targets. In order to train himself, Vader found various small insects as sparring partners. Grow Big Quickly was one of the spells he often used during this period. Of course, spiders and cockroaches are a bit too much to challenge the limits of reason, and Vader himself can't stand it. He usually looks for emerald green mantises with 2 big knives. At this moment, for Vader, he had just said hello to his opponents, and all of them fell down, and they also let out miserable wails in a car-to-car collision posture. It seemed that his previous preparations were a bit redundant. Scourgify. Vader waved his wand, and the green liquid and dung bombs disappeared, leaving only a lingering smell. Then he used the flying curse to take away everyone's wands, and then lifted the petrification curse. The classroom suddenly erupted into loud cries and screams. "Stop arguing," Wade said with a frown. In an instant, all sounds disappeared. Vader walked towards Malfoy. The blonde boy suddenly turned pale with fear, kicked his feet on the ground and shrank back, screaming, You, don't come here." Vader pressed his shoulder with the collected wand, squatted down, and looked seriously into the other person's eyes. "You know. If you are my enemy, I will break your wand right now." Malfoy was stunned for a moment, and after a long while he stammered and trembled. You can't." To a wizard, the wand is no less than half a body. Some adult wizards cannot even cast simple spells without the wand. If the wand is damaged, it can be replaced with a new one, but generally speaking, only the wand that was chosen as a child and has accompanied the wizard as he grows up is the most suitable and most faithful. Most wizards' wands will accompany them to the end of their lives and then be buried with them in their graves. This is a companion from birth to death. In the classroom, someone sobbed. "Of course, I won't do that." Vader looked at Malfoy's relieved expression and continued. "But it's not because of who your father is or who your grandfather is, it has nothing to do with any of this. It's just because we are classmates, we should be friendly to each other, right?" Malfoy, "Look at the swelling on my body, smell the stink on my body, do you know that spider almost ate me just now? Do you know what it feels like to be hugged by a spider's legs? Is this also called getting along well?" "Yes." Master Malfoy lowered his head and said softly. "Thank you. It's great that you understand. After all, I just want to study hard and don't like to cause trouble." Wade originally wanted to pat him on the shoulder, but when he thought that these people were covered in dung bombs just now, his raised palm fell down again. Malfoy, on the other hand, followed his movements, and his heartbeat became violent and tightened, and he began to feel a dull pain in his chest. When he heard Wade's words, he almost cried. Is this devil-like guy really the Ravenclaw he knows? Who among them is Slytherin? Also, can you please stop bullying my friends in the future? Don't use those dirty tricks again, otherwise I will be very, very angry. As a person, I will definitely avenge myself. Des said very sincerely. If you think you can ignore my warning, you'd better defeat me first. I personally welcome all fair challenges. Malfoy just stared at him blankly. showing no reaction, and no one else spoke to him. Vader, who was talking to himself, began to feel a little embarrassed. He put down the Slytherins' wands and turned around to leave. Before leaving the house, he suddenly turned around. Malfoy, who had just touched his wand, threw it away again with a snap. Not quickly hid behind Goyle, and everyone else was also startled. "Don't be so nervous. I just want to ask," Wade asked. "You won't complain to the professor, right, saying that you were scared to tears by spiders and cockroaches? Only one person knows about the shameful thing, and it is the same as the whole school. Ridicule, I think the difference is quite big. Don't you think so?" Quote. Everyone's expressions froze, especially Malfoy. He didn't know how many times he had made up his mind in his heart, tell the professor, tell Dad, break your wand, get you expelled. But Wade seemed to hear his inner voice, and smiled gently and said, "You just use the magnification spell to play a joke on your classmates, you won't be expelled, we still have more than 6 years to spend together. The previous misunderstandings are over, and we will get along well in the future, okay?" Everyone understood his threat and nodded very stiffly. Wade laughed. "Very good, then it's settled." Not long after Wade walked out of the potions classroom, he saw Michael and Padma peeking around the corner. Seeing him coming, the two jumped out from the corner and looked around Wade. "Are you not hurt?" Padma asked hurriedly. "I just heard a lot of screams in there." "It's okay, I didn't suffer any loss," Wade said. "Cool, all solved," Michael said excitedly. "Let's go quickly. Someone wanted to go over and check, but we stopped them. I wonder if they will call Professor Snape." The three hurried away along the corridor, and a big eye appeared at the corner. Wade turned his head and blinked, with his right hand behind his back, making an "okay" gesture. The elf McGee grinned and also stretched out his slender fingers to reply, "Okay." Then he hid in the shadows, his big ears swaying, listening to the movements of the Slytherins. As Vader expected, the Slytherins did not complain to the professor. 7 or 8 Slytherins ambushed a Ravenclaw of the same age, and ended up losing the battle. He was so frightened that he cried in the end. This kind of embarrassing thing, even if you talk about my dad every day. Malfoy didn't want others to know. After Wade left that day, several people supported each other and went to the school infirmary for treatment. The reason was that the potion accidentally exploded while practicing in private. This kind of mistake is very common for students, but it is too outrageous that so many students were injured. Madame Pomfrey believed that Professor Snape had not fulfilled his management responsibilities and complained for more than half an hour. Snape, who heard that many students in his college were injured, hurried to the school infirmary and heard Madame Pomfrey's complaining voice before he entered the door. Snape was confused. He didn't know anything about the situation and thought it was really his responsibility, so he could only stand at the door with a gloomy face and get scolded. After all, Madame Pomfrey was already the school nurse of Hogwarts when Snape was studying in school. He always had conflicts with the James Potter quartet, was often injured, and received a lot of care from Madame Pomfrey. Now Snape and Dumbledore can fight each other, but he always keeps his temper in front of this lady. Although he said nothing, his cold eyes swept across the faces of several people one by one. Snape could tell at a glance that the red and swollen patches on their bodies were all caused by failed scabies potions, but after having attended potions class for more than half a year, who could make such a stupid mistake? If it were Neville Longbottom of Gryffindor, or Seamus Finnegan, the explosion expert, then there would still be some possibilities. After Madame Pomfrey went to take care of other students, Snape walked over and asked, "What's going on?" Malfoy, whose face was smeared with potion, lowered his head and couldn't see his expression clearly. He whispered, "I was not careful, Professor." Snape narrowed his eyes. Draco Malfoy's posture made him feel a little familiar, just like what he himself said to others more than 10 years ago every time he lay in the school doctor's office. But he did it because he knew that even if he told the truth, no one could help him, and it would lead to contempt and even more bullying. Draco Malfoy has always been pampered by his parents, and he doesn't know how high the world is. Why did you hide it for the perpetrator? But since he was beaten by a group of people, Snape didn't bother to care. He actually always felt that with Draco Malfoy's arrogant and mean-mouthed attitude, it would be a matter of time before he was beaten. At noon the next day, Michael and Wade went to the auditorium to have dinner together. When they met Slytherin, Michael was subconsciously nervous, but saw that the two people, Millicent and Not, both lowered their heads slightly, and waited until they walked over before continuing to do what they were doing before. "What did you do to them?" Michael asked in disbelief. Wade thought for a while. "You may not believe it, they gave up resistance before I even entered the classroom yesterday." Michael looked at him suspiciously, then nodded clearly. "If it is a secret that cannot be told, then just pretend that I haven't asked." "It's not really a secret," Wade said slowly. "I can also show it to you guys. I hope you won't be scared." "How scary can it be?" Michael didn't believe it at first, then thought of something and asked anxiously, "You got a boggart?" A boggart is a shape-shifting magical creature that can transform into a person's worst fear. Wade shook his head. "That's not true. If there is a chance, I would like to see it." Several Slytherin girls headed by Pansy passed by, and when they saw Vader, they nodded unnaturally. After encountering him several times in a row, Vader found that the attitude of those Slytherins, at least some of the first-year Slytherins, towards him had changed subtly. It was not resentment, contempt or waiting for revenge, but a faint hint of fear. With some admiration and adoration. Slytherin students, all seemed to have some strong-willed mentality. This thought flashed through Vader's mind. Without Slytherin to target him, for Vader, college life was mostly occupied by studying. He didn't even go to the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff. He just heard that Harry caught the golden snitch in only 5 minutes, and Snape, who was the referee, was said to have a very ugly face. The difficulty of the traceless stretch spell is unexpectedly high, especially what Vader wants is to create a storage box that looks like a small world like Newt Scamander. The difficulty is even higher. Professor Murray advised him not to worry. In his spare time, Wade also built 2 alchemical works to practice his skills. One is a slowly rotating Mobius strip with a little man walking on it forever, the other is a machine that automatically sweeps and mops the floor. The little crab sometimes sprays colorful bubbles that make people feel happy. Both Hermione and Padma can't put it down. By the way, on Sunday afternoon, Vader also brought his insect sparring partners to the Umbrella House, which resulted in an unprecedented high-pitched roar. Harry used a very powerful disarming spell to blow away the forelimbs of the mantis. Hermione also successfully used the iron armor curse for the first time, and Michael used a blazing burst of fire to burn the spider until it screamed. It turns out that although the insect sparring partners are ugly, the teaching effect is very good. By the end, even Neville has made obvious progress. When Padma was besieged, he actually jumped onto the spider's back and inserted his wand into the huge compound eye. Lupin's magic teaching has also begun. The first thing Vader proposed to learn was the spell of extracting memory. "Lupin, can I know, why do you want to learn this spell?" In the Friends book, Lupin's words are cautious. He implicitly advises, according to the regulations of the Ministry of Magic, any spell that tampers with other people's memories is illegal. Vade, the user is myself. After a moment, Vader's answer appeared on the paper. "I forgot something important and must remember it. In addition, I also want to learn brain occlusion. Do you know it?" Lupin, of course. During the Wizard War, we all had to learn how to prevent the enemy from getting information directly from our brains. But to be honest, I am not an expert in this area. The person who is really good at this kind of magic should be Severus Snape. Vade, I just need to know the conventional practice methods, at least I can't let others sneak into my brain silently and seize my will. Vade would not go to Snape to learn brain occlusion, because people who are good at closing the brain are often good at soul reading, but he can't let anyone see through his thoughts and memories. Still, communicating through the friend book makes him feel safer. Even if the learning effect is a little worse, Vader can slowly improve through practice. In the room where every request is answered, Vader finished writing a line of words, and while waiting for Lupin's reply, he looked up at a gray stone basin placed on a stone pillar. The stone basin is flat and wide, empty inside, without a drop of water. There is a circle of gems inlaid on the outside, which looks sparkling and gorgeous. After a practice, Harry quietly discussed with Michael in a low voice, what should Ron do if he also wanted to join the SSC? Will Vader agree? During this period, every time Harry studied and trained in the Umbrella House, he felt very happy and felt a sense of accomplishment even if he was injured. But as soon as I returned to the dormitory, this happiness disappeared quickly like a popped balloon. Ron hadn't spoken to him for more than half a month. Sometimes he would pretend not to see him when he saw him. During class, Ron would always run to talk to Seamus or Dean, the other two guys in the dormitory. A boy sat together, and the two were no longer inseparable. Although the SSC was very good, Harry also missed the time when he and Ron were lazy together, played wizard chess together, and complained that the homework was too much and too difficult. Ron was the first friend he made after entering the magical world, and Harry cherished this friendship very much. He thought that if Ron could also join the SSC, then they might be able to return to their past. Michael asked a few questions, and after learning what was going on, he already gave Ron a cross in his heart, and once again lamented his foresight. Michael thought for a moment and said, "Harry, I understand that you want to reconcile with your friends. But have you ever thought about it? Friendship needs to be maintained by both parties. Can you tolerate his temper? Does he understand you? What's the problem?" Harry was stunned for a moment, then said, I did promise to help Ron with questions before, but I broke my promise." "That's another question, Harry," Michael said slowly. "I think that if someone wants to join another established group, he should take the initiative to show his ability and willingness, and use sincerity, hard work or talent to gain everyone's recognition, instead of asking his friends to intercede for yourself. It's going to be difficult for both of us." He looked into Harry's eyes and said, "First of all, it's you. I guess these words must have been pressing in your heart for a long time. Every day you are embarrassed about how to speak and whether you will be rejected. You are nervous and worried about this all day long, and then there's us. If someone doesn't like Ron Weasley, then he's going to be in a dilemma whether he should refuse or be patient. Will it hurt the relationship between us if he refuses? Friendship." In fact, when Hermione wanted to let Harry join, Michael wanted to say this, but Wade's words convinced him. Harry Potter's parents died for the war, and their orphans should certainly receive preferential treatment. Hermione always had a motherly affection for Harry, which Michael found understandable. Once these Gryffindors take someone into their hearts, they are so passionate that they want to tear their hearts out, but Michael cannot tolerate them constantly bringing people in. After joining Ron, will he join Seamus in 2 days, Dean? In a few days, will all the other Gryffindor students be brought in? Michael didn't say it outright, but his disapproval was made clear. Finally, he said, "Weasley turned what was originally his own problem into a problem between us. And during this time, what was he doing? Cold war with you, Harry. If he breaks up with you over such a trivial matter, does he cherish this friendship? Quote, or is he determined that no matter what he does to you, you will take the initiative to reach out and make peace with him?" Harry fell into a long silence. When they returned to the Ravenclaw lounge, Michael told Wade about the incident, and then asked, "Do you know what Harry Potter experienced before he came to school?" "I heard that I grew up with Muggle relatives," Vader said, "and everyone knew about this." Michael sighed. His relatives probably didn't teach him well. Harry might not even have friends before. "How do you know?" Padma came over and asked. "He's pretty good. It's impossible not to make friends, right?" Although wizards are accustomed to living in isolation, Padma and the others also know that children from Muggle families always stay in groups. During holidays, they occasionally play with children living in nearby villages. "He behaves a little humble when getting along with his friends," Michael said puzzledly. "Even if his parents died, he was the savior. Why is this? I thought Harry Potter should be even more proud, even as arrogant as Malfoy." Muggles probably don't understand the meaning of the boy who lived. In their view, Harry must be the scumbag left behind by his relatives, right? Wade said while flipping through the book. Padma listened with rapt attention and murmured, "That's no wonder." "What?" Michael asked. "Didn't you notice?" Padma said, "The clothes under Harry Potter's robes always don't fit well. I thought that was some kind of trend in Muggle clothing." The two discussed various speculations in low voices, and Wade turned another page of the book without speaking. In his impression, Harry Potter had been abused by his aunt's family when he was a child, but when he grew up, the relationship between the two parties seemed to be reconciled. I don't know if it was the original plot or the fan interpretation that left an impression on him. But recently, Wade also noticed a strange sign. Harry's attitude towards Professor Quirrell suddenly became enthusiastic. Every time they met on the road, he would give him an encouraging smile. It was said that he also began to actively answer questions in the Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Hermione did not dare to stop him blatantly and could only watch. His behavior made many people nervous. Snape wandered around Harry more frequently, making Harry think that Snape was following him and wanted to catch him and put him in detention. He even missed 2 days of SSC training for this. On this day, during the SSC training, Neville, whose wand was hit again, seemed to have suffered a great blow. He was in a daze for a long time, which made everyone very worried. Wade motioned for others to continue training, walked over and patted Neville on the shoulder, and asked, "Want to talk?" Neville nodded sullenly. The two walked to the side and sat on the sofa. Wade did not rush to talk, but poured a glass of water first and drank it slowly. Neville was silent for a long time before asking, "Wade, my disarming spell gesture is correct, and the spell is correct, right?" "Well, you are almost more standard than Hermione," Wade said affirmatively, with some doubts in his heart. "But I still always fail." Neville lowered his head, scratching the gap on the table with his fingers, as if he felt that what he wanted to say was difficult to say. "Is it because I am too stupid?" he asked in a low voice. "I don't think you are stupid. You performed very well in the herbology class, didn't you?" Wade said. "The reason why you have never learned the disarming spell may be because you are not confident enough. If you doubt your magic, it can't respond to you well." So, Neville hesitated for a long time, and finally asked, "It has nothing to do with the wand, right?" Vader didn't understand. What does it have to do with the wand? Neville looked at his wand, scanning every familiar scratch on it, and whispered, "This is not my wand, it was left behind by my father. My grandma originally did not agree with me carrying it. She said if it were not my own wand, the effect would be greatly reduced. But He insisted on taking the wand with him instead of going to Ollivander's to buy a new one. It was as if his parents were with him." Neville always felt powerless when casting spells with this wand, but he didn't take it to heart. Because he had long accepted the fact that he was clumsy, cowardly, and not very talented, and even often wondered why he was sorted into Gryffindor instead of Hufflepuff. In fact, when he was in the sorting house, Neville argued with the sorting hat for a long time. He thought that he did not have the courage required by Gryffindor and asked the hat to sort him into Hufflepuff. But the sorting hat insisted that he should go to Gryffindor, and finally announced the result of the sorting. However, after joining SSC, Neville could feel his steady improvement every day. The curse began to become less difficult for him. For the first time, he gained great joy and sense of accomplishment. Therefore, when he encountered another setback in spell learning, he could no longer tell himself calmly, "Yeah, you're just so stupid and can't do anything well." He knows he can actually do it, but his chosen partners are holding him back. Neville complained to his grandmother in the Book of Friends, and Mrs. Longbottom once again told him in strong words, "Put down those useless persistence, you need to get a new wand that suits you." "Vade, tell me, what should I do?" Neville asked confused. Wade knew that when he hesitated about this, he already had a preference in his heart. Just going against his long-standing insistence was like asking him to let go of his feelings for his parents, so that was why he was so embarrassed. Wade thought for a moment and said, "Why don't you let the coins decide?" "Coin?" Neville, who was immersed in confusion, was dumbfounded. Vader took out a silver sickle from his pocket and clamped it between his fingers, and said, "Front, continue to use the wand left by your father. Even if you have to work 10 times or 100 times to reach the normal level, you will give up." Yin Zik turned half a circle between his fingers. On the flip side, treasure the longing and love for your parents in your heart, choose the most suitable wand, gain more power, become a son that your parents can be proud of, and have the power to protect others. Do you see clearly? Neville swallowed hard, nodded, and stared at the silver sickle nervously. Vader glanced down and saw Neville's hands clenched into fists, crumpling the corners of his clothes. "Then, let's begin," Wade said, and with a flick of his fingertips, Yinxico quickly spun and flew high into the sky. Neville raised his head involuntarily, his eyes following the dazzling silver light as it rose, then fell, and his heart suddenly rose to his throat. Wade covered the silver coin with his palm and slowly opened it. Gudong! Neville's throat surged, and his palms broke into cold sweat. Just when Silver Sickle was about to be revealed, Wade suddenly grabbed his hand again. "Ah!" Neville couldn't help shouting. "I haven't seen it yet." "But you already know, right?" Wade asked. "What is the answer you really want?" Neville was stunned for a moment, as if there was a loud thunder above his head. Wade stood up and left, leaving him alone on the sofa to think slowly. "How is Neville?" Theo came over and asked worriedly. "It's okay, he will figure it out," Wade said, looking down at Silver Sickle in his palm, suddenly smiled, and put it in his pocket. What the hell? It turned out that fate was also favoring this stupid kid. But, rather than being pushed by fate, it would be more appropriate to make a decision after careful consideration, right? In a blink of an eye, it was the Easter holiday again, and this time professors of various subjects assigned a lot of homework. With only 2 weeks of spring break, most students won't choose to go home. Neville applied to leave school, and he was going to Diagon Alley to pick a wand that really suited him. Vader also applied to leave school, but he only went home to spend the holidays with his parents on Easter. The rest of the time he spent studying spells with Lupine in Hogsmeade. The spell to extract memory is not as advanced as Vader expected. If the memory provider concentrates on recalling and is willing to give it actively, this spell can become very simple. Forcibly digging out the memories that the master wants to hide is a form of advanced black magic. Occlumency requires long-term practice, and the most basic requirement is to clear your brain. No thinking, no recall, no perception. Advanced techniques involve weaving false memories and emotions in the mind to fool Legilimency masters. During the holidays, Vader made the most progress in the Transformation Curse and the Disguise Curse, and he also learned how to use several fire spells. Lupine also taught him some tips that could be used in school, such as spells to check whether there are typos in papers. Vader returned to school the day before school started. When he distributed the Easter eggs to his friends, he noticed that the 2 Gryffindors looked nervous and worried. "What's wrong?" Wade asked. "This." Harry and Hermione looked at each other, and then Hermione said sadly, "It's Hagrid. He got a dragon egg and even planned to hatch it." Wade recalled. "I remember this is illegal, right?" "Yeah," Harry said with a frown. "What if someone finds out?" "Hagrid doesn't care at all. He just wants to be a dragon mother." "Well, it's quite Gryffindor," Wade complained in a low voice, and seeing that the two were very troubled, he said, "I know a friend who works as a breeder for Mr. Scamander. Maybe you can hand over the dragon egg to them to help hatch it. Or ask someone to secretly transfer the dragon egg to a place where breeding is allowed." "Of course." In the surprised eyes of the two, Wade added, "The premise is that you can convince Mr. Hagrid to give up his current plan. Private individuals cannot raise dragons unless they are willing to go to Azkaban. This is not an easy task. Hagrid is born to love all dangerous creatures, and raising dragons is his lifelong dream." Even though he knew that Harry and Hermione's worries were right, he couldn't convince himself to give up the cute, unborn dragon baby. The half-blood giant's eyes welled up with tears when he thought about the little guy's life after leaving him, or even being caught by wizards to draw blood and cut out dragon liver. This dragged on until the dragon baby was about to be born. "Expelliarmus!" Neville shouted, and Hermione's wand fell out of her hand and landed on the cushion next to her. "Successful!" Hermione exclaimed happily. Without picking up the wand, she rushed over and hugged Neville first. "That's great, Neville!" Theo clapped vigorously, then helped Hermione pick up the wand and return it to her. Neville finally smiled and said happily, "I tried it when I was at home. My grandma was also very happy. She said that my father didn't know how to disarm the curse when he was in 1st grade. Is this a new wand?" Michael looked at his wand. "Yes." Neville showed his new partner to everyone. "Cherry wood, unicorn hair, Mr. Ollivander said it suits me very well." When choosing a wand for the first time, every little wizard still remembered the wonderful feeling of finding half of their body. They touched Neville's wand one by one and said with certainty that he would become an excellent spell master. While they were chatting and laughing, the door of the umbrella house slid open. Neville looked back and saw a frowning Harry walking in, shouting enthusiastically, "Harry, you're here too." "Hello, Neville," Harry said hastily. "Oh, Hermione, great, you're here too. Michael, do you know where Vader is? He went to the library to borrow books and should be here soon. Do you have anything to do with him?" Michael said. "It's Hagrid," Harry said, He asked me to invite Hermione, Neville and Vader to the hut. Gamekeeper. That big guy. Michael raised his eyebrows slightly. Students at Hogwarts often see Hagrid's cabin across the lawn, but not many go near it. Because in the eyes of the students, the unusually burly Rubeus Hagrid looked very scary. Some students thought he was just a servant of the castle and didn't even know his name. As for the name of the gamekeeper, it is actually more related to the Weasley twins. It is often said that those two people were captured by him from the Forbidden Forest. Unexpectedly, Harry had a good relationship with him, but why did he invite Vader? While talking, Wade also came in from the door holding a book. After hearing about Hagrid's invitation, he put down his book and they went to Hagrid's hut together. On the way, Harry told them, Hagrid said that the baby dragon is about to hatch, and he wants us all to see it. After all, not many people can see the scene of the fire dragon hatching with their own eyes, right? Under Hermione's disbelieving eyes, Harry's voice became smaller and smaller. I can't believe it, he even knew he was raising a fire dragon. Hermione said angrily. He lives in a wooden house. Don't, Hermione, Harry whispered. At least don't make a noise today. Hagrid is looking forward to. Hermione tensed her face and nodded reluctantly. Arriving at the door of the cabin, Harry stepped forward and knocked. Hagrid opened the door, looking very happy. Hurry up, you're just in time. Hagrid said excitedly, the baby is coming out soon. Harry walked in and his steps suddenly froze. Ron was also sitting in the cabin. He turned his head and looked over, then quickly avoided their eyes and stared at the dragon egg, as if he was studying the patterns on the shell. Hermione looked at this and that, a little at a loss. Come in quickly, don't be stunned. Hagrid was completely unaware of the subtle atmosphere between the few people, and with a sweep of his hand, he called them both into the room. He lowered his head and said to Wade, I'm glad you can come too, Wade. Not many people have seen the scene of a little dragon coming out of its shell. I guess you must be interested, right? Of course, thank you for the invitation, Hagrid. Wade smiled and said. He walked in, ignored the awkward looks of the three people, sat on an empty chair nearby, and looked at the dragon eggs on the table with great interest. This is a dragon, even though it's a western lizard dragon, who wouldn't want to see it? When he sat down, Wade felt like he had seen something strange. He raised his head and saw a bunch of slender and soft white hair hanging from the ceiling, hanging together with several copper pots, like some ethnic minority decorations. In Hagrid's messy hut, those white hairs had an unusual smoothness and sanctity. Hermione couldn't wait to find something to talk about, and immediately asked, what kind of animal hair is that, Hagrid? Oh, it's unicorn hair. It was pulled from the tail and hung on the branches in the forest. Hagrid didn't pay much attention at first, but seeing Wade staring at it, he said, oh, Wade, you are studying alchemy, right? Take it and use it, I still have it if it's not enough. He generously tore off a large handful and gave it directly to Wade. Vader refused. It's too expensive, Hagrid. A complete unicorn tail hair costs 10 galleons. Ron, who had a straight face, almost fell off the chair. He looked at the white hairs that he thought were horse tails in surprise, and his eyes almost popped out of his head. The Weasley family has 7 children, and they usually live very hard. When he went to school, he didn't even have anything new. He wore the old robes left by his brothers, held an old wand, used old textbooks, and even his pet was an old mouse that his brothers didn't want. As long as Ron has grown up, he has never saved more than 1 galleons of pocket money. It's not worth anything. Hagrid shook his head and said nonchalantly, I often find it in the woods. He forced all the unicorn tail hair to Wade. Hagrid's idea was actually very simple. On the night when the Potters died, it was Hagrid who took the swaddled Harry out of the ruins. At that time, he felt that he had a wonderful sense of responsibility for this weak and soft little life. When Harry was 11 years old, he even went there in person to introduce Harry to the wizarding world. Hagrid looked at Harry with the feeling of a parent looking at his own child. When he learned that Harry was taken care of by Wade at school and learned a lot of useful spells from him, Hagrid had been thinking about how to repay Harry's parents on behalf of him. At this moment, seeing that Wade had something he liked, and he happened to have it too, he naturally gave it away happily. Hagrid's complicated thoughts may not be clearly explained by himself, but Wade felt a little bit. He glanced at Harry, who was unaware of it, and accepted it. It doesn't matter whether the gift is valuable or not, he will always be able to repay it. Look, it's coming out, Hermione suddenly exclaimed. The eggshell cracked open with a crackling sound, and a white nose poked out. Then a black baby dragon struggled to squeeze out. Its spurred wings slapped on the table with a clack, and a few sparks came out of its nose. Almost all newborn animals have a natural sense of cuteness, even the naked Norwegian Spinosaurus is no exception. When the little guy spreads its wings and spreads its teeth and claws on the table, it doesn't look like an adult dragon at all. The feeling of intimidation is like being coquettish. But when it opens its mouth to reveal its long, slender fangs, the cuteness quickly fades and the threat quietly arises. But in Hagrid's eyes, this little dragon, which was no bigger than his hand, was so cute. He quickly claimed the identity of the dragon's mother, couldn't put it down, touched the little dragon's head, touched his wings, and then was sprayed by the little dragon. An angry fireball. Look, it can breathe fire, Hagrid said proudly as he patted the sparks on his beard. Hagrid, Hermione said worriedly, how fast does the Norwegian Spinosaurus grow? Oh, it doesn't grow very fast, Hagrid said lovingly, but it can only grow to 50 feet when it reaches adulthood. 50 feet, Hermione exclaimed. Yeah, it's really tiny now, isn't it? Hagrid didn't understand Hermione's worries at all. He took a bucket of brandy from the corner, and took out the chicken blood he had prepared in advance, and asked, would any of you want to try feeding it? Harry and Ron raised their hands in unison, while Hermione leaned back, her refusal obvious. Wade was also very interested at first, but seeing the excitement of the two people, he put his hand down and reminded, be careful, its teeth are poisonous. Hagrid first demonstrated how to feed himself, and then handed over this glorious task to the Gryffindor duo. Vader watched for a while, satisfied his curiosity, and then said goodbye, mainly because Hagrid made the hut too hot in order to hatch the baby dragons, and he broke out in a sweat within a few minutes of staying inside. After a while, Hermione also came out. Vader waited for her and said, I thought you were going back to the Gryffindor common room with Harry. Hermione said, that's what I thought. But I think, well, we should give them a space to have a good talk. In the hut, Harry and Ron didn't even look at each other. They took turns feeding Charmander, working together without disturbing each other. Hagrid was chattering beside him about his love for the little one and thinking hard about what to name it. Maybe I should read a book, there will always be answers in books. Hagrid muttered, finding an old book from his cabinet filled with bottles, cans and tin pots, and flipping through the pages with his thick fingers. Find the right name. Harry was absent-mindedly feeding the fire dragon, and he didn't notice that he was a little slow, and the little guy opened his mouth and bit it without hesitation. Careful, Ron slapped Harry's hand away, spilling a spoonful of brandy on the table. Charmander puffed angrily at his keeper, and was about to spit out a fireball. Harry quickly pushed the remaining chicken blood brandy over and let him drink it by himself. The black Charmander plunged into the wine and fluttered around in a panic. He soon discovered that he was surrounded by delicious food and drank with concentration. The two of them breathed a sigh of relief at the same time, and the deliberately indifferent atmosphere naturally eased. Harry hesitated for a moment and finally said what he had been thinking in his chest for several days, Ron, I've always wanted to say. I actually wanted to ask a question that day, but the rule of the club is, unless everyone agrees, nothing can be done. Introduce other people to join. I thought, it would be better if I asked other people's opinions privately first. Of course, the first person he asked blocked his attempts, which Harry didn't think he needed to say now. Ron exhaled and relaxed his tense shoulders, you know what I think. I thought you made some cool friends, but then you started to drift away from us. In fact, Ron was also feeling very uncomfortable during this period. Malfoy also ridiculed him. Why, Harry Potter finally realized that some people couldn't stand up to the stage at all, so did he dump him? I have to say, although it was stupid, but it was the right decision. Ron was so angry that he became dizzy and had another fight with Malfoy. His ribs were still aching. But compared with the physical pain, it is more sad that the friends are drifting away. No, of course not. How could it be? Harry was taken aback and hurriedly denied, saying, you are the first friend I have ever made. Ron suddenly smiled and asked curiously, what do you usually do in that club? After asking, he breathed a sigh of relief. He was finally able to ask this question calmly. Harry explained to him. SSC is a study group, and we usually write papers together. But after dinner, Vader will teach everyone some spells that are not taught in school, mainly the defense against the dark arts spell. I learned it recently. It's really difficult to learn the disarming spell and the iron armor spell. I only learned it after being injured many times. Do you want to learn it? Is it okay? Ron was a little worried. Would this violate the rules of the society? No, Vader said that we can teach others, but the effect of my teaching may not be that good. For Wade, the changes in the friendship between elementary school students were not a big concern for him. He had more important things to do now. Early in the morning of the weekend, Wade came to the outside of the House of Requirement and walked back and forth 3 times, concentrating his mind and thinking, I need a room with a meditation basin. I need a room with a meditation basin. I need a room with a meditation basin. A simple and narrow mahogany door appeared on the wall, and Wade opened the door and went in. This place looks like the home of an ascetic monk. There are only simple wooden beds and low stools in the room, and there is a half-person high stone pillar next to it. A shallow empty stone basin is placed on it. The edge of the basin is engraved with complex ancient magic words, and there is a circle of thumb-sized gems around it. The gorgeousness is out of place compared to this house. This is the meditation basin, a magical item that can be used to preserve memories and ideas, and even allow people to enter memories and reproduce past scenes. It contains powerful and complex magic. Even Professor Murray said frankly that he could not make a meditation basin. Wade pointed the wand at his temple, chanted the spell in a low voice, and concentrated on recalling those memories that had long been faded by time. After a moment, he removed the wand, and a thin silver thread was pulled, extending from his temple, getting longer and longer. Wade gently rotated the wand, as if collecting spinning thread to roll it up. After a few turns, the silver thread finally broke. It floated gently on the tip of the wand like spider silk, and one end approached the meditation basin. Wade gently tapped the wand on the meditation basin, and the silver thread fell into it, slowly rotating like mist, emitting a faint glow. This is the memory of his previous life that he had almost forgotten. Wade took a deep breath and plunged into the silver memory. It took Vader a whole day to reconstruct and organize his memories. When he walked out of the room of requirement, the sky had completely darkened. Although the room of requirement and the Ravenclaw lounge are both on high floors, one is in the main tower and the other is on the top floor of Ravenclaw Tower, which is quite a distance in between. Normally, Vader would have used the flying curse to summon a broom to fly over, but today, he was walking slowly along the corridor while sorting out his thoughts and figuring out what he was going to do next. In the long corridor, footsteps echoed, emptily. Suddenly a voice broke the silence. Ha ha, surprise. A surprise for you. Peeves suddenly appeared, holding several black water balls in his hand and throwing them at Wade. Vader quickly pulled out his wand and pointed it, and the ink rolled back, and all of it fell on Peeves' face. Bah, 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 bah. Peeves spat out the ink in his mouth and cursed angrily as he flew away. The corridor was filled with dark ink. Vader was already familiar with the cleaning spell. He waved his wand a few times and all the ink disappeared, leaving the corridor as clean as ever. Someone applauded. Beautiful silent spell. Wade turned around and looked. Griffiths. The red-haired wizard once again scurried into someone else's portrait, following him with a smile behind his back. Wade thought about the sudden appearance of Peeves and asked, is it possible that Peeves was instigated by you? Well, yes, Griffiths admitted very frankly, and said, I think you seem to have been caught by some time monster, with a deep and scary look on your face, so I asked Peeves to say hello to you. How are you feeling now? Wade didn't know what his expression was before. He rubbed his face and said helplessly, then I really thank you. You're welcome, you should help students. Griffiths said with a smile, and then asked, what were you thinking before? Wade didn't want to discuss this topic and asked, your relationship with the portrait in the foyer has become better recently. They haven't complained to me for a long time. Of course it has gotten better. Griffiths said hesitantly. Wade stopped, frowned and asked, could you be? Haha, there were 2 Hufflepuff students who wanted to hear my story about the past just now. I'm leaving now and we'll talk next time. Griffiths raised his voice as if he felt guilty, and then he hurried out of the portrait, not knowing where he went. Vader shook his head. During this time, the name of the chatty Griffiths gradually became known to more students, because he always liked to chat with people, and sometimes he would suddenly appear from a certain portrait and scream, looking frightened. The student fell into the trap on the stairs and laughed like a Peeves ghost. But the students hated Peeves, but not Griffiths. Because in addition to the occasional harmless pranks, he would also tell some stories that were not known to be true or false. Sometimes when he saw a student was in a low mood, he would comfort them and do everything possible to make them laugh. Wade often saw 4 or 5 students gathered around Griffith's portrait, chatting with him. Griffiths, who has most of his free time taken up by students every day, is so busy that he even does not harass other portraits, much less. Vader originally thought that was the case. But looking at the guilty look on his face just now, it seemed like there was another story. Back in the dormitory, Wade took out the friend account, first talked to his father for a while, and then changed to another friend account. Vade, Remus. After a while, Lu Ping's reply appeared on the paper. Lupine, I'm here. Vade, I have one thing to ask you. Tomorrow morning, please go to Gringotts with my father to withdraw some money, and then go to Borgenbach's store in Nocturne Alley and buy the disappearing cabinet from the store. Lupin. Okay. Lupine agreed simply. After a while, he wrote new words. Lupin. But as far as I know, there is only one disappearing cabinet in Borgenbach's store, and the other one is missing. If another disappearing cabinet has been damaged, or is in a place where humans cannot normally enter and exit, such as on the seabed or buried deep underground, then such a disappearing cabinet is useless and may even be extremely dangerous to the user. Vade. I know, but there's also a vanishing cabinet in Hogwarts Castle. Vade. It's worth a try, right? Lupine. I understand, but promise me, don't try it yourself. We can experiment with rabbits or something first. Vade. Of course, I won't be so reckless. After closing the friend account, Wade felt a little hopeful. The enemy can appear in the safe fortress at any time, which makes people feel no sense of security at all, but if he can leave the castle at any time, it feels wonderful, and he can do more things. Vader had many thoughts lingering in his mind, as well as various changes in the plot. The basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets, Peter Pettigrew hiding in Gryffindor, the Quidditch World Cup and the Goblet of Fire competition, Barty Crouch escaping from prison, Voldemort resurrection, the incompetent Ministry of Magic. There are also Horcruxes hidden by Voldemort in various places, and several methods to destroy Horcruxes. The Sword of Gryffindor, Basilisk Fangs, and Li Huo. I still have to learn the fiery curse. Think about the blazing fire that burned half of Paris by Grindelwald, and Dumbledore waving his wand like the god of fire. If he has the same strength, does he need to be so cautious? Wade wrote down his thoughts on a piece of paper, and after reading it for a while, he rolled the paper into a ball and put it close to the candlelight, watching it gradually burn into ash. The jumping firelight reflected in his pupils, and deep in his eyes, it seemed to be another scene. Hogwarts was flooded by the black mass of Death Eaters, trolls and 8-eyed giant spiders were rampaging, and corpses were lying on the cold ground. Under the war, life is so fragile. And there are those that are not played out in the plot. After Dumbledore's death, Hogwarts and the Ministry of Magic were almost occupied by the followers of the Dark Lord, and the 3 protagonists had to flee. In that short and long year, how many non-pure blood wizards were persecuted? What about Muggles? And what about the squibs that no one cares about? Did they survive because they were weak, or because they were weak? Even if they were killed, they would only become a string of cold numbers in the newspaper. Wade suddenly saw the smiling faces of Ferdinand and Fiona, and then the other 2 faces that were already blurred in his memory, trying to smile in sadness. He covered his eyes with his palms and sighed tiredly. He revised the content of the chapter. Lupine was very efficient, and he told Vader at noon the next day that he had bought the vanishing cabinet from Borgin and Burke's. At the same time, Vader borrowed the vanishing cabinet in the castle from Professor McGonagall on the pretext of studying alchemy, and promised that he knew the dangers involved and would not get into it randomly. The vanishing cabinet is a black and gold cabinet with many ancient magic texts and various wonderful patterns engraved on it. Ancient magic forms a wonderful passage between the 2 disappearing cabinets. Even in Hogwarts, where apparition is prohibited, people can achieve the magic of instant movement through the 2 disappearing cabinets. In the plot, the Death Eaters invaded Hogwarts along this passage, and Dumbledore also died that night. Vader used the shrinking spell to bring the Vanishing Cabinet to the Room of Requirement, and then found time to conduct experiments. He communicated with Lupin through the Friends account, put various things into the disappearing cabinet, and then took them out from the other end. The first few experiments went smoothly. Apples, bread, pillows, buckets and other things were put in and they were all intact when taken out. Lupin also suggested using living animals to conduct experiments: rats, rabbits, pig monsters. The size is getting closer and closer to humans, and they are gradually replaced by magical creatures. The experiment went awry on the 13th occasion. Wade felt something was wrong when he opened the cabinet door. After opening the door, he found a dwarf pig monster lying inside that had stopped breathing. Vade, it's dead. Lupin, what happened? Vade, there are no wounds, but breathing has stopped. You can take a look over there. Vader closed the cupboard door again, then Lupin opened it and saw the cold body of the piggish. He moved it out and examined it carefully. Lupin, the body was very cold, as if it had been dead for at least 3 or 4 hours. There were strange cracks on the surface of the skin, and the bones became brittle than biscuits. The moment it closed the door, it seemed to go to a strange place, and then died there. Lupin, Vader, the Vanishing Cabinet is more dangerous than we thought. Vade, I understand. The experiment is on hold while I see if I can repair this cabinet. When he put down his pen, Wade couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He thought that the Vanishing Cabinet was broken by Peeves when Harry was in second year, but he did not expect that it was not intact before being broken. He stared at the disappearing cabinet with all his concentration. Slowly, countless golden magic lines emerged like running water. Complex magic arrays were stacked layer by layer. Hundreds of ancient magic words were wrapped around the disappearing cabinet like chains. Tiny flaws, incomplete lines, runes worn by time, magic that seems to be corroded. He found the missing parts of the disappearing cabinet bit by bit. Umbrella House. The actual combat training was over, and everyone applied bruise healing ointment to each other. Harry asked, Vader seems to be very busy recently. He only comes to the Umbrella House once every 3 or 4 days. Every time he comes, he spends about an hour teaching them a new spell and pointing out the problems they encounter in learning, and then disappears quickly. Yes, Michael said helplessly. The alchemy professor seems to have left a very difficult assignment for Wade. Recently, he rarely even comes back to the rest room, and always stays elsewhere to study alchemy. Cleaning crabs crawled over, collected all the tampon balls, and mopped the floor. Everyone's eyes couldn't help but follow it around. They didn't leave the Umbrella House until the crab returned to its shell nest and lay down quietly. As soon as I walked down the next floor, I met an unexpected person. How are you? Professor Quirrell seemed to be startled by this encounter. With a shy smile on his face, he stretched out his hand and whispered hello to his students. Michael, Hermione and Ryan reflexively lowered their heads and said, Good evening, Professor. Harry and Theo said generously, Hi, Professor Quirrell. Neville was a step behind, and he hurriedly said hello. When the two sides were about to separate, Harry added an extra sentence, Come on, Professor. You were really brave. Professor Quirrell smiled briefly and nervously, stretched out his hand and waved slightly. You. Hermione stared at Harry with 1,000 words in her eyes. Theo said directly, Harry, do you think Professor Quirrell is, brave? There is no more timid professor in the whole school than Quirrell. You don't understand, Harry said deeply, as if he was hiding a lot of secrets in his heart. Professor Quirrell is fighting against evil. He is really amazing. Although Theo and Neville didn't understand, they nodded in confusion. The others looked at each other with incomprehensible expressions. Keep an eye on him and don't let them get close again, Michael said in a low voice. Everyone nodded silently, feeling that they were burdened with a heavy responsibility. Harry didn't know about other people's worries. He returned to the dormitory with joy as always, shared what he had learned today with Ron, played wizard chess for a while, and then went to bed. But for some reason, the scar on his forehead hurts tonight. While everyone else fell asleep, Harry couldn't sleep. He simply put on his coat and sat in front of the window, looking at the starry night scene outside. Suddenly, a black shadow passed through his vision, and Harry reacted for a moment before he realized that it was a person flying through the sky on a broomstick. Who was that? What was he doing flying over the school in the middle of the night? Harry found his Nimbus 2000 without thinking, rode on the broomstick through the window, and jumped down from the 8th floor of the castle. He quickly descended in the air, and soon pulled up the altitude again, hovering in the sky for a while, and found a figure by the Black Lake. Harry went around from a high altitude, and when he got close, he found that the person standing there was actually Wade. "Hi, Wade." Harry dropped his broom and walked over, asking, "Why are you here?" "Harry." Wade turned around, also a little surprised. "It's so late, why haven't you slept yet?" "I can't sleep." Harry touched the scar on his forehead and said, "I don't know why, I have a headache today, maybe Snape is cursing me under the Black Lake." Wade's eyes swept across the lightning-shaped scar and answered the previous question. "I was about to go back to sleep at night, and suddenly I saw that there seemed to be a white-haired person here. But when I flew over, I found that he was gone." He was not sure whether the figure he saw tonight was the same as the one he saw more than half a year ago, but for some reason, Wade always cared about this matter. Maybe because the distance was too far, he had never seen the name of that person. Harry scratched his hair, without thinking too much, guessed, "Maybe you saw it wrong." "Maybe." Wade did not argue. He saw Hagrid holding an oil lamp and his hound Fang, taking advantage of the night to walk into the Forbidden Forest. "It looks like Hagrid hasn't slept yet," Wade said. "He should have gone to feed Norbert, right?" Harry said casually. "Norbert." Wade suddenly turned his head and looked at him. "Yes. Oh, that baby dragon. Hagrid named it Norbert," Harry explained. "It grew bigger and bigger, and it was impossible to keep it in the wooden house. Hagrid moved it to a cave in the Forbidden Forest." Wade was surprised. "Didn't send it away." Harry sighed helplessly. Hermione persuaded him several times, and Ron also said that his brother Charlie was studying dragons in Romania, and Norbert could be sent there for them to take care of, but Hagrid said he couldn't bear to do it. Roar. In the Forbidden Forest, a huge roar suddenly sounded, and a beam of fire suddenly shot out and rushed straight into the sky. The roar of the fire dragon suddenly sounded, suddenly tearing apart the peaceful night sky of Hogwarts. "Hagrid," Harry shouted, immediately got on his broom and flew out. "Gryffindor." Wade sighed helplessly. Hagrid had just entered the Forbidden Forest, and was at least a mile away from where the fire appeared. There was no danger whatsoever. Vader also rode on his broom and entered the Forbidden Forest. He raised the height and used his good eyesight to walk between the black canopies. In front, Hagrid was holding the wine barrel, shouting the name, "Noble," and running rampantly in the Forbidden Forest towards the direction of the fire, with his hound following closely behind. When Harry saw that Hagrid was fine, he had already flown towards the fire dragon first. They were all very fast, and soon they arrived at a cave. Wade saw Harry standing aside with a pale face, and Norbert, who was as big as a house, fell to the ground, with huge and ferocious wounds on his eyes and chest, and bright red blood flowing gurglingly. "Norbert!" Hagrid screamed in grief and rushed to hug his baby dragon, trembling to test whether it was still breathing. Several sparks that seemed to be extinguished came out of Noble's nose. "Don't be afraid, good baby. Mommy will treat you right now." Hagrid's palms were trembling as he rummaged through his pockets for healing potions. Vader was still in the air, scanning his surroundings warily. The Black Forest was silent. The roar of the fire dragon made all the small sounds disappear. At this moment, there was only the sound of wind, Hagrid's wailing, and the crackling sound of dead branches burning in the fire. Vader fired 2 red spark signals into the sky, and placed detection spells around the area before landing. Hagrid was pouring white moss essence onto Noble's wound, but the blood was like an open faucet, quickly washing away all the potion. "This is a wound caused by black magic. Ordinary healing potions are useless," Vader said. He pointed his wand at Noble's wound and recited the counter curse in a low voice. Luckily he had just learned it from Remus 2 days ago, and half a minute later, the bleeding was finally stopped. Hagrid watched helplessly, and only now did he dare to ask, "Is he okay?" "No," Vader said, "I can only do this to this extent, and I have to find more professional people to do the rest. But at least, his life should be saved." "Thank you, Vader, thank you so much." Hagrid burst into tears. "If Norbert dies, it will feel like my heart has been ripped away." He hugged the ferocious head of the Norwegian spinyback dragon tightly. The dragon opened its eyes feebly, watching Hagrid cry loudly, and sprayed hot gas from its nose. What happened here? A cold, seemingly angry voice sounded nearby, making Harry's face turn pale as he was in a daze. Snape, wearing black robes, walked out of the darkness. He stared at everyone as if he wanted to drain their blood. The black robe was swaying behind him like a dark cloud, as if he was not running over, but flying over. Immediately afterwards, a spotted cat jumped down from the branch, and when it landed, it had transformed into Professor McGonagall in pajamas. She looked at the situation at the scene and suddenly screamed, "An injured fire dragon! What's going on?" Before Harry could answer, someone else appeared, Professor Quirrell, who stumbled through the woods holding a scarf, and Dumbledore, who suddenly appeared with a burst of fire. Suddenly, this scene is very similar to that of Halloween, except that Professor Flitwick is missing and replaced by Dumbledore. Only, Harry's body was trembling slightly and he subconsciously took 2 steps in Hagrid's direction. Someone heard Norbert, Dumbledore. Hagrid took out his big handkerchief and wiped his tears, and said in a tearful voice, "Please save him, this child is seriously injured." Dumbledore leaned over and looked at Norbert. The wounds caused by dark magic had obvious characteristics, but the wounds had a tendency to shrink. Dumbledore was only slightly surprised, and soon understood who among the 3 people present was capable of doing this. "A very beautiful dark magic counter curse, Mr. Grey," Dumbledore praised. Wade bowed and said nothing. "Don't worry, Hagrid," Dumbledore said gently. "Madame Pomfrey will cure her. Minerva, please find a suitable place for this child." "Okay." Professor McGonagall was staring at the 2 students sternly. After hearing Dumbledore's instructions, she looked back and took Norbert away with the levitating spell. "Slow down, Professor McGonagall," Hagrid couldn't help but warn. "He's still a baby. It's all my fault for not taking good care of him. Private dragons are prohibited," Snape said sarcastically from the side. "Hagrid, I thought you knew this." Hagrid bit his lip, his huge body looking pitiful. "We'll talk about this later," Dumbledore said calmly. "Harry, Vader, why are you 2 here? Running out of the castle at night and coming to the dangerous Forbidden Forest is not a wise move." Quote, "I couldn't sleep at night. I was in the dormitory, looking at the starry sky and so on." Harry suddenly stammered. "I accidentally saw Hagrid walking into the Forbidden Forest, and then I heard the cry of the fire dragon, and there was fire. I was worried that something had happened to Hagrid, so I flew over to take a look, and then Wade came too." He ignored the fact that the 2 broke curfew first and ran around the school. "Did you see what hurt the dragon?" Dumbledore asked. Harry shivered, as if still scared. Wade said, "No, when we came, the scene was already like this." Dumbledore nodded and looked at the pool of blood on the scene. He didn't know what he was thinking. Everyone else waited with bated breath. In the cave, the sound of footsteps suddenly came out, and a white, holy creature walked out of it. Its whole body was emitting a shimmering light, its long legs were limping, and silver-white blood flowed along its body. "The body drips down." "Merlin," Hagrid exclaimed, "how dare that man hurt a unicorn?" The unicorn knelt before Dumbledore, then leaned over to Hagrid, as if asking for his help. Dumbledore used a spell to heal the unicorn's wound and said to Hagrid, "Send it to Madame Pomfrey too. Take Vader and Harry with you, I think they need a drink tranquilizer." Hagrid nodded, picked up the unicorn without hesitation, and greeted, "Come with me, children, thank you for worrying about my safety. But I have to say, this is too dangerous, really very dangerous, don't run around again next time." Harry responded hummingly, and when he turned around, he saw Snape frowning, as if he wanted to object to Dumbledore letting them go so lightly, but Dumbledore said, "Severus, Quilly Nass, can you please patrol around the Forbidden Forest tonight? Maybe the guy who injured the fire dragon is still wandering around here. Of course, for safety, you'd better not separate." The dense forest blocked Harry's view. Madame Pomfrey's healing magic is very good, and the medicine in the medical room is also very complete. After pouring down several bottles of magic potion, the fire dragon and unicorn, who were originally in pain from their wounds, calmed down and soon fell into a deep sleep. Professor McGonagall was preparing to temporarily place the fire dragon in the Quidditch pitch. She was busy setting up a barrier with spells around it to prevent students from accidentally breaking in and being harmed by the fire dragon. The unicorn was able to rest near Professor Sprout's greenhouse, and the fat witch happily prepared many berries and fresh oat grass for the unicorn. Other professors also came after hearing the news. It was the first time that Hogwarts was so lively late at night. Fire dragon. A strange little old man rushed to Norbert's side with gleaming eyes. His body was covered with scars, and both legs and one arm were wooden prostheses. At this moment, he used his only remaining hand to caress Nob's black wings and said excitedly, "Hagrid, you should have told me you raised a dragon." Professor McGonagall, who had set up the barrier, came over and said angrily with a straight face, "Professor Kettleburn, raising dragons in private is a serious violation of law." The fearful anger of everyone in Hogwarts seemed to have no effect on the little old man. He smiled slyly and said, "Don't be so rigid, Minerva. Where is anyone raising a dragon illegally? It's obviously a dragon living in the Forbidden Forest. A wild baby dragon broke into Hogwarts because it was hungry, and our kind gamekeeper just fed it a little food. It's not illegal at all. Oh, it can still be like this." Hagrid tapped his palm in sudden realization. "Please stop encouraging illegal behavior, Professor Kettleburn. Don't forget that you are still on probation." Professor McGonagall was originally very serious, but she laughed as she spoke. Yes, 62 probationary periods. But it doesn't matter, I'm about to retire anyway." Professor Kettleburn spread his hands and said, then approached the fire dragon again and asked, "This child has a name?" "Hagrid. His name is Norbert," Hagrid said proudly. "I saw him come out of the shell with my own eyes." He. Professor Kettleburn was stunned, looked at it carefully twice, and then smiled. "It should be, she. This is a little girl." "What?" Hagrid was shocked and stepped forward, while Professor Kettleburn began to teach him how to identify the gender of a young dragon. "In that case, wouldn't it be bad to call her Norbert?" Hagrid quickly entered the "silly dad with a daughter" mode, as if he was worried that his baby daughter would be discriminated against because of her name. "It's better to call it Norberta," Professor Kettleburn suggested. "It sounds like a girl's name, and it's very cute." "Oh, you two, make it easy for me to find you." Madame Pomfrey suddenly appeared, stared at Vader and Harry and said hurriedly, "Come with me, Dumbledore said you might need a bottle of tranquilizer agent." "No, we weren't frightened," Wade said. But Madame Pomfrey didn't listen at all. She took the two of them to the school doctor's office, stuffed a bottle of tranquilizer into each of their hands without any explanation, and said, "Drink the medicine and then go to bed early. It won't be long before dawn." When Wade saw it, he realized that this was the potion he had brewed himself. "Is Dumbledore back?" Harry asked hurriedly when he saw that she was leaving. "How should I know that, child?" Madame Pomfrey said. "But you said, he told you we needed sedatives," Harry demanded stubbornly. "Dumbledore sent his Patronus to inform me." "What is a patron saint?" "Drink the potion and go to sleep, child." Under Madame Pomfrey's oppressive smiling gaze, the two of them had no choice but to drink the sedative in one sip, and sleep quickly came over them. The next morning, although no one had deliberately publicized it, it seemed that the entire school knew what had happened last night. They all ran to watch the fire dragon and unicorn. After walking around, the SSC members learned that Wade and Harry were also involved, and ran to the school doctor's office to find them. "I heard that someone attacked the fire dragon." Hermione rushed in and said worriedly, "Are you okay? Did you run into that guy?" "Don't worry about the fire dragon for now. Harry looked around and said, "I have a secret I want to tell you about the attacker last night." "Wait, Harry," Michael interrupted him suddenly, walked to the door, looked outside, and then closed the door. Ryan reacted and walked to the window to make sure no one was standing outside eavesdropping. Wade asked, "Did you see that guy?" "Yes, I went a little earlier than you. I saw that person's appearance." "He was." Harry couldn't help but shuddered and said, "Professor Quirrell." The room suddenly fell into dead silence. Harry was a little anxious and said hurriedly, "Maybe you think I'm lying, but no. In fact, I overheard it a few weeks ago, in the woods. It was the Quidditch match and the day Gryffindor won. I heard Snape threatening Quirrell to cooperate with him in order to steal the magic stone hidden on the 4th floor. They were also the first to arrive in the Forbidden Forest." Theo asked, "I heard that Professor McGonagall was here first." "You weren't there, so you didn't see it. Professor McGonagall was still wearing pajamas when she arrived. She was obviously woken up by the dragon. Harry tried to explain the basis of his reasoning, but Snape and Quirrell, they were dressed neatly, and they might have wandered in the Forbidden Forest before, and even attacked Norbert and the unicorn. It was only later that Hagrid arrived that they had to run away, and then pretended to be awakened and ran over, but they didn't have time to change into suitable clothes. No one spoke for a while. In silence, Neville looked around and said something to make conversation. Harry, I see you were particularly enthusiastic about Professor Quirrell recently. I thought you liked him very much. I thought he was fighting against Snape. Harry said in annoyance. I wanted to encourage him to be tenacious. I didn't expect him to side with Snape so quickly. Looking at the complicated expressions of the crowd, he couldn't help but feel a little irritated, and couldn't help raising his voice and said, Are you trying to say that they are professors, people Dumbledore trusts, so they won't do that? But I really... Harry, calm down. Wade suddenly interrupted his shouting, and his flat voice was like a basin of cold water, extinguishing Harry's excitement. He looked at Wade, but saw that Wade was looking at others. Tell him about that matter. Wade said. Harry has learned this much, and telling the truth is not considered that we have violated our agreement with Dumbledore. Harry was stunned. Tell me, what? Chapter 91. Harry felt as if his heart was being immersed in a cold lake, taking away the warmth from his body bit by bit. His stomach was shrinking, there was a bitter taste in his mouth, and he even felt like vomiting. So, Quirrell is, just, Voldemort, Vader reminded. To be precise, he is possessed by Voldemort. There was a gasp in the room, and Michael said with a pale face, Don't mention that name again, Wade. Wade said helplessly, If you are even afraid of a name, how did you resist trembling in front of Professor Quirrell? How can that be the same? Michael retorted. Professor Quirrell is cowardly, but that person. Michael trembled and closed his mouth silently, as if he had difficulty breathing. Vader looked at the others and saw that they all looked shuddering. Even Hermione looked very scared. How wonderful, Vader thought to himself. They even dared to face that person, but they didn't dare to mention his name. Harry didn't have such scruples. He said bluntly. So Voldemort wanted to make a comeback, so he didn't just send 2 men to steal the Sorcerer's Stone for him. He even came in person. Yes, it was in the form of a pendant, hidden behind Quirrell's head and sneaked in. Wade said. Wrapped in the smell of garlic all day long, he even had to endure some naughty students throwing it in his face. Throwing snowballs at the top. Think about it, they thought they were sneaking up on the timid Quirrell, but they were actually smashing, the mysterious man in the face. Taking care of the emotions of most people, Vader did not speak directly to Voldemort. His words also made everyone feel scared and funny at the same time. Even Harry couldn't help laughing. But, Harry said tangledly, why didn't Dumbledore let you tell me? I mean, I also have the right to know the truth, right? Voldemort killed my parents. Dumbledore is trying to protect you, Harry. Hermione explained. He seems to be worried that you will seek revenge from the mysterious person after knowing the truth. This is too dangerous. Harry was a tolerant person, and when he heard that the principal did this out of concern for him, his hidden anger gradually dissipated. But he still didn't understand. Then why don't we arrest that guy now? When he is still defenseless, if we all do it together, can Quirrell and Voldemort still escape? I guess, well, it's just a guess, based on what Professor Dumbledore said. Vader said. 11 years ago, that man did die, but for some reason, he didn't complete death, a bit like a ghost state, cannot be trapped or killed. If you take action rashly, you will probably only be able to leave Quirrell, and Voldemort will still escape. Don't say that name, Vader, Michael whispered. ... Okay, Vader continued. The mysterious man still has the ability to come back for a second or third time. You never know when he will appear. Someone trembled silently. It's like you know there is a venomous snake at home, but you don't know where it is, but it can come out of the shadows and bite you at any time. Compared with this situation, it is better to keep the venomous snake under your nose. It's reassuring, right? But, isn't Dumbledore worried that Quirrell will steal the Philosopher's Stone, and then Voldemort will regain his former power and even become immortal? Harry asked again. I told you not to mention that name. Michael muttered and said, since Dumbledore knows everything, he must have set up a dragnet to protect the Sorcerer's Stone, just waiting for Quirrell to steal it. But that guy was too cautious and didn't take action after waiting for so long. Quote, maybe he also discovered that this was a trap, Ryan suddenly said, but the desire for immortality keeps him hovering near the bait, reluctant to give up. Maybe he is also waiting for a foolproof opportunity. What's a surefire chance? Theo asked. That must be, Harry clenched his fists, when Dumbledore left school. Because Dumbledore is the only person he fears. In the days that followed, the little wizards began to pay more attention to Dumbledore's schedule than ever before. If they saw the white-bearded wizard while eating in the auditorium, they would feel at ease for the rest of the day. If not, they would immediately become nervous and try their best to find out from the professors whether Dumbledore was out. However, soon, they had to devote most of their energy to paying attention to another thing: the exam was coming. For students, in a sense, exams are as scary as the Dark Lord, even Hermione, who already has excellent grades. Examinations for most subjects at Hogwarts are divided into two parts: written examinations and practical exercises. The written examination is conducted in a large classroom that can accommodate students from all grades, and a new quill with an anti-cheating spell must be used. The actual operation is varied, and the professor who teaches the class sets the questions himself. For example, Professor McGonagall requires students to rats become exquisite snuff boxes. For Wade, the content of all exams is very simple, and the actual operation is more like a personal show. Judging from the satisfied smiles of the professors, he will definitely have a beautiful transcript. The last course was History of Magic. Since Wade had sorted out his History of Magic scroll, he rarely spent time on this course. He only memorized the knowledge points before the exam. After finishing the test, Wade confirmed that his accuracy rate was more than 90%, which was enough for him. Today was also Thursday, the day when Professor Murray taught him alchemy. After the exam, the students cheered that they were finally free, and Wade greeted Michael and walked towards the astronomy tower as usual. Professor Murray was fiddling with a microscope. When he saw Wade come in, he exclaimed, "Look, how wonderful it is. Muggles use this machine to observe various tiny structures of things, including tens of thousands of cells in the human body." He enthusiastically taught Wade how to prepare glass slide specimens, how to adjust the light and focus. Wade did not mention that he had learned it before. He followed Professor Murray's steps to observe worm eggs and moth wing slices, and then talked about the recent progress of alchemy. "I want you to see this," Wade said, taking out a box from his school bag. At this time, he found that the friend book placed next to him was slightly warm. Wade paused for a moment, then he closed his school bag and put the blue-gray box, which was only the size of a pencil case, on the table. Professor Murray's eyes lit up. "You succeeded so quickly." Only a preliminary result was achieved. Wade reached out and opened the box, only to see that it contained several feather pens and ordinary pens. It seemed that this was all. Then he closed the lid and used the magic wand to point, and the pencil case turned, expanded, extended, and stretched like a page of a book. After a while, a wardrobe more than one person tall stood in the middle of the room. Wade opened the door and smiled. "Professor, maybe you would like to go in and take a look." The space inside the closet is far from the small world that Wade imagined. It is only slightly larger than the Umbrella House. The room is empty and there are no decorations. Professor Murray certainly doesn't want to see these superficial things. He doesn't have the same eyes as Wade, but he has his own way to examine the magic pattern circuits. The layers of inlaid ancient magic runes form a structure as delicate and perfectly balanced as a honeycomb. The traceless extension spells that are linked to each other like chains are complex and orderly, simple and neat. Hundreds of spells are like whirlpools, which not only ensure the stability of the structure, but also leave sufficient space for expansion. This is just a prototype. But it takes root, sprouts, and grows tender leaves in the most perfect posture. Professor Murray examined its veins and could almost see the moment when it grew into a towering tree. After walking out, Professor Murray looked at Wade and smiled with emotion. "There is nothing I can teach you about the traceless extension spell, Wade." Wade did not hide his joy and smiled happily. This made him look more like his age than usual. "What are your plans for the summer vacation?" Professor Murray asked again. "Reading, studying, nothing else," Wade said. Professor Murray pondered for a moment, frowned and said, students cannot use magic during the summer vacation, which is too inconvenient for your study. You live in a Muggle area, and once you cast a spell, the Ministry of Magic will immediately find out. Actually, Wade explained, I plan to stay at home for a few days and then go to the Leaky Cauldron to book a room, so that I can bypass the Ministry of Magic's monitoring of the trace. Professor Murray nodded slightly and said, it's a way, but it's not good. Old Tom is a good person, but there are often unidentified guys in that place. It's not safe for you, a child, to live in a bar, and the environment is not good. Mr. Lupin can accompany me, and he will teach me defense against the dark arts. Wade said. Lupin, Professor Murray snorted. This is exactly what I'm worried about. His opinion of werewolves can be said to be deeply rooted, and he will never give real trust. Well, you go home first, Professor Murray thought for a while and said, I'll go and discuss it with Mr. Scamander. Maybe he will be willing to let you visit him. Mr. Newt Scamander. Wade's eyes lit up. You mean? Yes, I guess you must want to see his magical suitcase. Professor Murray smiled. No one is better than him in the use of space spells and weather spells. In Wade's excited eyes, Professor Murray said again, it just so happens that he likes Stephen very much, and Stephen also told him about you. Yes, he mentioned it several times. Mr. Scamander also has a good impression of you. When leaving Professor Murray's office, Wade still felt his heart beating fast, his eyes were bright, and he walked very briskly. Newt Scamander. This man used to be just the protagonist of the Fantastic Beasts series of movies to Wade. He was kind, gentle and dull, and almost never looked at people straight in the eye. He loves magical animals, is loyal to Dumbledore, and would go through fire and water for the old headmaster. Coming to the magical world, Wade found that Newt also left a strong mark in the history of modern magic. His magical box, his outstanding performance in the 2 Wizard Wars, and his lifelong efforts to protect magical creatures are all recorded in history books. Even included, he once caught Gellert Grindelwald. This is a man full of legends, although he himself may not want such a reputation. After walking out of the astronomy tower, Wade opened the friend book. The earlier news has disappeared. This is of course, after all, he spent nearly 2 hours in Professor Murray's class. The latest message comes from Padma. Padma. They went to the restricted area on the 4th floor. Wade. Padma. Where are you? Padma. Merlin. You finally saw the news. Padma. I'm outside the corridor on the 4th floor. Padma. It's almost curfew time. Filch's cat has been staring at me. I think I saw Peeves just now. What should I do? Dumbledore is not here. No one has come back. Just from the messy words, one can feel the girl's fear and worry. Ved. Wait for me. Ved walked quickly to the main tower. When he passed the entrance hall, he turned to the auditorium and packed some bread and barbecue. Filch stood at the entrance of the entrance hall, staring at the students who were still eating dinner unhappily. Ved nodded at him and said, Good afternoon, Mr. Filch. Filch was slightly surprised. He stared at Ved suspiciously, as if trying to figure out what bad ideas he had. But Ved had already walked past him quickly. All the way to the corridor on the 4th floor, Padma walked back and forth outside the restricted area, looking out from time to time, as if she was afraid that her movements would be noticed by others. At a corner not far away, the skinny Mrs. Norris was squatting on the ground, staring at her quietly. Hearing Wade's footsteps, she turned her head and looked over here again. Wade threw 2 dried fish to Mrs. Norris and came to Padma. Wade. Padma looked like she was about to cry, and the hem of her clothes was wrinkled by her own grasping. Don't worry. Wade stuffed a sandwich into her mouth and asked, Eat something. Have you notified the professor? Michael found Professor Flitwick, who said the Philosopher's Stone is safe, so we don't have to worry and enjoy the days without exams. Padma's tone was inevitably filled with resentment towards the professors. Professor McGonagall also told Harry the same thing, and she also warned us not to make trouble, otherwise we would lose a lot of points. Professor Sprout is teaching the 5th grade, and we don't have a chance to talk to her. Padma finished speaking quickly, holding the sandwich and unable to eat. Where's Professor Dumbledore? He received an urgent letter from the Ministry of Magic and went to London. Padma said tearfully, We don't have his friend list, so we can only send letters through owls. I don't know when he will receive it. Maybe when he comes back, everything will be too late. Don't worry, remember what we said before, Dumbledore knows everything about Hogwarts. Wade comforted. After recovering his previous memories through the pensieve, Wade was even more certain that Dumbledore had full control over the school during Harry's first year of school, and that Quirrell's perceived opportunity was merely a flaw that Dumbledore deliberately revealed. The game in the underground was the real, final exam that Dumbledore left for Harry and his companions. Having said that, Vader cannot wait here. The little wizards who run to break through the level are unlikely to die, but injuries are unavoidable. Time has passed so long, I don't know where they have reached. I'll go take a look. Vader said to Padma, it's almost curfew. You go back to the lounge first. If I find anything, I'll tell you from my friend's account. Padma grabbed his sleeve and shook her head vigorously. Padma, that's what Michael told me too. The girl choked, I don't want to wait any longer. Waiting all the time is more uncomfortable than anything else. I would rather face gods and mysterious people with you. Wade was silent for a moment and sighed. Okay, then that guy will follow me. Padma nodded and followed Vader to the 4th floor. Meow. Mrs. Norris suddenly let out a sharp roar, arched her back and stood in front of them. Wade glanced out of the corner of his eye and saw dried fish scattered on the ground, seemingly motionless. Sorry, we have to get through. The two of them walked forward. Mrs. Norris bared her teeth and took 2 steps back. Then she rolled her eyes and ran downstairs quickly. Collapse. Vader waved his wand, and a red flash hit the gray cat on the back. She fell down with a thud and slid to the side of the corridor. Great, she must want to inform Filch. Padma couldn't help but said, how could there be such a nasty cat? In the eyes of her owner, she is the most devoted and good cat. Vader said, pushing open the half-open wooden door. Padma gasped when she saw the scene inside clearly. The ferocious 3-headed dog was tearing at a harp. When it heard the sound, it immediately looked towards the two of them and let out a low roar in its throat. Padma's lips trembled and she said tremblingly, Harry said, as long as it hears music, it will fall asleep. Can I sing to it? But in desperation, she couldn't remember what she could sing. Music. Wade threw a small ball on the ground. It rolled like a ball, and sweet piano music began to play halfway through. What is this? Padma asked blankly. Für Elise, Beethoven's classic work. Vader answered. No, I'm asking, what is this little ball? Padma asked, looking at the little ball that not only sang, but also rotated and emitted colored lights. Music player, the magic version. Your new invention. Not really, Vader said, this is a Muggle invention. I just made a small modification. Now that he knew there was a 3-headed dog in the secret room, Vader naturally chose to be prepared. Ever since the first note sounded, the originally ferocious 3-headed dog began to feel drowsy. After a while, he fell on the floor and fell asleep. Its 6 nostrils spurted out smelly hot air, and its huge body occupied most of the vision. Padma mustered up her courage and walked half a circle around the 3-headed dog. I heard there should be a trap door here, on the ground. The two of them looked at the 3-headed dog at the same time. It seems to be suppressed by it. Vader recited the levitating spell, and the 3-headed dog was moved aside and continued to lie down. As expected, a trap door was revealed on the ground. Vader grabbed the ring and opened the door, and immediately heard a familiar voice. Great, someone is finally here. Neville's thankful voice came. Who's up there? Take out your wand, Neville. Michael warned in a low voice. The one above may be their accomplice. Padma heard their voices and knew that several of them should be fine. She lay on the trapdoor and cried and laughed and said, Michael, are you all okay? Padma. Several voices shouted in surprise. Vade is here too, we are together. Padma said to the people inside. Then, several people rode brooms and flew up through the trapdoor one after another. Michael took Neville with him. Neville's leg was broken and bleeding. Fortunately you were here. The 3-headed dog blocked the trapdoor, and we couldn't get out even though we tried our best. Michael explained. There was a big bruise on Theo's face, and there were many small and narrow wounds on his body, as if he had been scratched by many sharp knives. One of Ryan's arms was bent at a weird angle, and he was sweating in pain. The most serious thing was Ron, who was brought up by Hermione. He was unconscious and his head was covered with blood. Oh my God! Seeing the miserable situation of everyone, Padma was so shocked that she couldn't help but burst into tears. I didn't bring any alkaloids with me, she said in a panic. It doesn't matter, I have it, Wade said, taking out a few bottles of magic potion from his bag and handing them to everyone, and analgesics. To be honest, he admired these children. With such serious injuries as broken arms and legs, none of these 11 or 12-year-old children cried, howled, and rolled on the ground. Many adults couldn't do this either. Perhaps magic gives them some innate ability to endure pain, or heal injuries. Ryan drank the analgesic in one gulp and said with a pale face, Harry is still down there. What happened inside? Padma looked at the dark hole in fear. Have you met that person? No. Hermione crossed her hands unconsciously, and she said nervously, if Quirrell and Snape wanted to steal the Philosopher's Stone, they should have been at the last level. The black flame blocked the way, and there was only one potion that could allow people to safely pass through the flames. Harry chose to go alone. Padma exclaimed. Isn't he afraid of death? Of course he was afraid, but he still chose to face it. The friend book in Wade's hand suddenly began to heat up. He opened it and saw a message from McGee, it's okay. The word it's okay can be interpreted in many ways, but at this moment, it only means one thing. Dumbledore is back. Go to the school infirmary first. Wade closed the friend book and said calmly, even if it's just for your injuries, Madame Pomfrey will contact Dumbledore immediately. The last sentence convinced everyone, and everyone rushed to the school infirmary as quickly as possible. The students they met along the way were all terrified. They probably thought that these little wizards had a life and death fight. When they arrived at the school infirmary, they saw a tall and thin figure from a distance, with long silver-white hair that could almost be stuffed into his belt. Dumbledore was walking hurriedly towards the school infirmary, holding a black-haired boy in his arms. Harry, Hermione jumped off the broom and rushed over. Harry Potter's eyes were closed, and he was covered with scars. The lightning-shaped scar on his forehead was red and swollen as if he had just been injured, and his hands were also as if they were scalded by boiling water. The girl's tears fell immediately. Wade looked at Dumbledore. The greatest white wizard was not as calm and gentle as usual, or a little childish and crazy. There was obvious worry on his face. But besides worry, there was something else, emotions like the deep sea. Suddenly taking over so many wounded people, Madame Pomfrey thought that some dark wizard army had invaded Hogwarts. Fortunately, for the wizard, the loss of arms and legs was only a minor problem, and she dealt with it quickly. The trouble is Harry Potter, who remains unconscious. After talking to Dumbledore, Madame Pomfrey arranged a separate ward for Harry. Wade took out the packed food and shared it with everyone. They seemed to realize that they were so hungry that their chests were touching their backs. While the little wizards were devouring their food, they also told Vader what happened under the trap door. In order to protect the Philosopher's Stone, the professors in the school arranged many mechanisms. The first was the Devil's Net laid under the trapdoor to save them from falling to death. The unlucky Neville did not choose the right landing spot and was broken at the first level. After losing his leg, I could only wait nearby. The next step was to catch the correct key among the birds-like keys. Harry gave full play to his talent as a seeker to catch the key, while Theo was scratched black and blue by the key in order to protect others. Then there was a dangerous game of wizard chess. Ron, who came down with Harry, won the chess game, but was punched hard on the head by the opponent's chess piece and passed out. Now he is also unconscious. Then there was a giant monster, which was bigger and more fierce than the one they met on Halloween. The little wizards tried their best to defeat the giant monster. Ryan broke his arm there, and everyone else suffered their own injuries. Some injuries. Wade was a little surprised. Troll. Yeah, a stinking giant monster. Theo sighed and said, I can't believe that you defeated that kind of monster without any harm half a year ago. If the trolls were the levels set up by Quirrell, the one on Halloween must have been released by him to cause chaos. Michael said, I heard that he even pretended to be frightened and fainted at that time. Wade frowned and said nothing more. The original trio did not encounter the troll. The butterfly effect. Still, in the last level, we were trapped in the room by flames. One potion left by Professor Snape can go forward, one can go back, and the rest are poison and nettle wine. Hermione's lips trembled slightly and she said, I solved the puzzle left by Snape. Harry walked forward. The rest of us each took a sip of the potion, and then found Ron and Neville and wanted to go back the way you came. You know the rest. She wrung her fingers tightly and her tone remained calm, rational and coherent. But his hair seemed to be slightly raised, and his body was as tense as a fully stretched bowstring. Hermione. Padma suddenly leaned over and hugged Hermione. Don't worry, and don't blame yourself. It was Harry's choice to confront that person, not your fault, and he will recover. Yes, isn't it? She gently pulled the girl's hand away, and saw that the back of Hermione's hand was covered with blood marks from her own scratches. You don't understand, Padma. Hermione leaned on Padma's shoulder, tears falling without warning. She choked and said, there is no bottom under the trap door. When Harry didn't know that a devil's net would catch us, he was the first to jump in. He also said, if something happened to him, we would just return immediately. I really. Padma gently stroked her back, vaguely understanding why Hermione was crying now. Not only because I was worried about my unconscious friend, but also because after returning to a safe environment, the despair and fear of watching my friend go to death surged from the bottom of my heart. She looked at the people around her. Although the boys didn't shed any tears, there seemed to be something different between their eyebrows. As if quietly, some kind of transformation had occurred in everyone. Suddenly there was a noisy sound at the door. No, Potter hasn't woken up yet, so visits are not allowed. Madame Pomfrey said sternly. Ma'am, we want to come to visit Theo and Ryan, we are both from Hufflepuff House. Someone pleaded at the door. Okay, no noise. Madame Pomfrey conceded. So a bustling group of people came in through the door. These students probably saw Theo and others walking through the corridor on broomsticks with injuries, and they all came to inquire about the news. When the wounded were surrounded by visitors, Michael and Wade winked, probably because both of them were intact. Others regarded them as spectators and paid little attention to them. So the two of them squeezed out of the school doctor's office smoothly. I want to see the secret room again. When he arrived at the door, Michael exhaled and said to Wade, now that Dumbledore has brought Harry out, the flames blocking the way may have disappeared. I want to see what happened in the last secret room. Quote. Wade said, let's go together. Of course. Michael laughed. I guess you must also be curious, how did Harry Potter turn danger into disaster again? In fact, Wade was not curious. He just wanted to take a look. The level under the trapdoor was almost completely destroyed. The two rode brooms and passed through the stone corridors and brightly lit rooms smoothly until they reached the end. This is a fairly spacious room with a vaulted roof, tall stone pillars embedded in the middle of the stone wall, and remaining flames burning around it. There is also a huge mirror in the room. The golden frame is very ornately decorated, with a string of words engraved on it, and two claw-shaped feet supporting it underneath. Look, Vader. Michael suddenly squatted down, poked a wizard's robe on the side of the steps with his wand, and said softly, if I remember correctly, this is Professor Quirrell's robe. Look, the scarf is also there. His words suddenly stopped, his eyes looked at the dust wrapped in his robe in horror, and he stepped back stiffly step by step. Instead, Wade took a step forward. He conjured a cylindrical bottle and collected some dust on the ground. Vade. Michael felt his scalp numb and screamed, do you know what this is? Professor Quirrell's remains, also the carrier of the mysterious man. Wade capped the bottle, looked at the soot-gray dust inside and said, what if it comes in handy? Suddenly, something seemed to be awakened, and eerie sounds came from all directions. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The living will die if they disturb the dead are nameless and receive no reward. Vade Gray. Michael Corner, do you want to journey into eternal rest? Michael's hands and feet suddenly became weak, and goosebumps appeared all over his body. He grabbed Vader's arm and said with an earthy face, Vader, you, hurry up and throw those things away. Vader's whole body felt chilly for a moment, but soon, he discovered something. Weasley, Wade said softly. As soon as the words fell, the original strange voice disappeared immediately. Michael's frightened expression quickly turned into speechlessness. After a while, two red-haired heads poked out from behind the mirror, one on the left and the other on the right. Hey, how did you know it was us? Fred asked strangely. It must be that your feet are not hidden, right? George walked out and said. Aren't we the same? Fred complained. Just now, They thought it was the professor who was coming. In a hurry, they hid behind the mirror. One foot was hidden behind the claw-shaped supporting foot, and the other foot could only be raised, holding the mirror in an octopus posture. When they heard that the people coming in were Vader and Michael, the twins suddenly became playful and pretended to be ghosts, hoping to see Vader and Michael panic, but they were called out. "Why are you here?" Wade asked. "Like you guys, let's see why our little Ronnie got knocked unconscious." Fred also walked to the front of the pile of ashes, squatted down and poked it curiously with his finger. Michael said, "Then you should go to the school doctor's office." Percy went. George said, he blinked, "And it's more interesting to investigate in the restricted area." "So this is Quirrell?" Fred asked doubtfully. "What kind of magic can burn someone like this?" "Li Huo," Michael guessed. He had only heard of the name of this kind of black magic, and he guessed it should be much more powerful than the ordinary flame. "Impossible," George said. "The strong fire will burn everything that can burn, and will not leave the clothes alone. It is more like other black magic." "When Harry wakes up, can't we just ask him?" Vader asked the question he was more concerned about. "Have you studied Lee fire?" Fred smiled proudly and said, "We secretly went to the library during the night tour, and read a few books that the professor was not allowed to read, such as the Encyclopedia of Spells, Advanced Black Magic Revealed, and so on. Fire is too dangerous and difficult to control. But fighting fire with fire is good. You can learn some useful little curses." George shared his experience without hesitation. Everyone studied around the mound for a while, but there was no result. However, the twins also collected some dust and took it back, saying they wanted to make a souvenir for their brother Ron. Michael walked around the stone house and found nothing. He walked in front of the mirror twice and suddenly felt that he had seen something strange. He stepped back and slowly turned to look in the mirror. Michael opened his eyes wide in shock and suddenly blushed. There was him in the mirror, but not Vader or the Weasley twins. He saw Padma. The girl's wheat-colored skin looks healthy and energetic, and she has an intoxicating and sweet smile on her face. She was wearing a dark blue sari, revealing her smooth and slender arms like lotus roots. The girl hugged Michael's arm in the mirror with love on her face, and the two were close to each other, inseparable. For a moment, Michael even became jealous of himself in the mirror. "What did you see?" Fred suddenly tilted his upper body to look at him from the side, and said in surprise and jokingly, his face is as red as if he is about to boil water. No, nothing." Michael hurriedly blocked the mirror. Wade also came to the side. He looked up at the words on the mirror and read out, "What I reflect is not your face, but the desire in your heart." He looked at Michael meaningfully. Michael, whose face was flushed, coughed dryly, secretly took a deep breath to cool down the temperature on his face, and then stepped away from the mirror. After calming down, he discovered that when he looked from the side, the mirror was empty and there was nothing. This is a magic mirror that allows people to see their inner desires. Fred stood in front of the mirror and laughed. "I saw that our prank product was a great success, and the two of us were lying on top of the golden galleons." George also smiled. "I also saw the Quidditch cup." Seeing Wade standing aside, Michael asked strangely, "Vade, don't you want to go take a look?" Wade was silent for a moment, then smiled and said, "What's in the mirror is just an illusion, right? So there's no need to look at it." Michael nodded. What he understood was that Vader knew exactly what he wanted, so he didn't need to look at a mirror to get satisfaction. But he wanted to take another look at Padma in the mirror. A few people lingered in front of the mirror for a while, and finally broke away from the illusory happiness and prepared to go back. Before leaving, Wade looked back again. The magic mirror stood in the middle of the empty room, as if it was making a silent call. Wade lowered his eyes and hurriedly followed the other three, as if escaping from the whirlpool. Harry fell asleep in the school hospital for 3 days before waking up. In the past few days, rumors had spread throughout the school, but Dumbledore did not announce the truth, nor did he stop the students from discussing the matter. The few people who entered the trapdoor were surrounded by people all day long, constantly begging them to tell the adventure story again. Neville got out of this trouble quickly because he was out at the beginning, while Theo, the best-tempered one, had a dry mouth when he spoke. Sometimes he accidentally said the wrong thing, and some people retorted loudly, "No, that's not what you said last time." Soon, except for the part Harry experienced alone. The students in the whole school knew all the other details of the story. They all knew that Professor Quirrell wanted to steal the Philosopher's Stone but suffered the consequences and was defeated by Harry Potter and his companions. Ron, who bravely made sacrifices, became the hero of Gryffindor. On the day he woke up, several Gryffindor boys carried him on their shoulders from the infirmary to the Great Hall. His unscrupulous brothers made a fuss beside him, making Ron's face as red as his hair. And privately, there was a more absurd saying quietly spreading: Quirrell was not Quirrell, but a puppet controlled by the mysterious man. So Harry Potter once again defeated the man who could not even be named. Of course, this rumor was too outrageous, and not many people really believed it. But precisely because they did not believe it, they told everyone more excitedly, you know. In fact, the truth is not what you heard. The rumor spread quickly in all directions with wings. Dumbledore's attitude towards this was ambiguous. When someone asked him directly, he said vaguely, well, the Philosopher's Stone, it will indeed be coveted by many people, especially those who want to escape death. The person who asked the question immediately understood. The name, Voldemort, means flying away from death. Yes, some of our students bravely fought against evil, showing great courage and responsibility, and they protected the Philosopher's Stone. Dumbledore changed his tone and smiled and said, but Nick and Perenelle have destroyed the stone. They decided to take care of some chores and then embark on an unknown road. For old people who have lived long enough, death actually has a different charm, doesn't it? The last week without classes passed quickly, and the last Quidditch match of the semester was held at the weekend. Gryffindor had no Seeker, and was beaten badly by Ravenclaw. Especially Ravenclaw's Seeker flew leisurely in the sky for a long time, and only caught the golden snitch after ensuring that Ravenclaw had a complete advantage. So this year, Ravenclaw finally won the Quidditch Cup. Gryffindor was indignant, but there was nothing they could do. But Slytherin still had the highest score in the house. There was no way. Professor Snape made an outstanding contribution in this regard. However, at the end of term dinner, Dumbledore finally gave extra points to all the people who had ventured into the Chamber of Secrets because of the previous incident. Each person won 20 points for his own house, and Harry Potter added an extra 50 points. Gryffindor immediately jumped to first place, and Slytherin slipped to second place. The excitement first belonged to the Serpentine House, and then to the Lion House. The students of Ravenclaw followed suit and applauded. They were third before the bonus points, and they were still third after the bonus points. But even if they were the last, the Eagle House didn't really care. It didn't matter whether the hanging ribbons hanging above their heads were red or green. The ups and downs of the students' emotions in the Lion and Serpentine houses were more interesting. In the teacher's seat, the subtle changes in the expressions of Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape seemed to have said 1,000 words. I still can't believe it now, Michael whispered to Wade. Professor Snape is not Quirrell's accomplice. He looks very much like a Death Eater. Don't you think so? Indeed, but if he was, how could Dumbledore let him stay in Hogwarts for so many years? Wade said. The day after the final dinner, the test results were finally posted. Wade's overall score was the first in the whole grade, but Hermione topped the list in both history of magic and astronomy. The scores of other members of the SSC were also very high, and they were almost the top students in every subject. Of course, in the eyes of those who don't know the SSC, the level of the first-year students this year is very good, and the distribution of each college is relatively even. Malfoy and Zabini from Slytherin also have high scores. Unlike previous years, most of the top 10 are Ravenclaws. The students once again signed the notice not to use magic during the holidays, packed their luggage, and boarded the Hogwarts Express. Wade, Michael, Theo, and Ryan occupied a compartment. Hermione was with the Potter sisters, and Harry and Neville were in a private room with their roommates in the dormitory. How about coming to our house to play during the summer vacation? Michael said enthusiastically. My family lives by the sea, and we can take a boat to the nearby island to play. Okay, Theo responded actively. Let's make an appointment and play together, otherwise it will be too boring to stay at home for 2 whole months. Where is Wade? Do you have time? Ryan asked. I'm going to learn alchemy from Professor Murray, but if I can spare the time, of course I will come. Wade smiled. Even if I am, I don't want to do nothing but study for the whole summer vacation. Then wait for my news. Don't forget to check the friend book, Michael urged. The train stopped at King's Cross Station, and the students got off one by one. As soon as Wade walked out of the platform, he saw Ferdinand and Fiona standing side by side, waiting for him happily. His mother gave him a hug as usual, and his father helped him lift the suitcase. Get in the car first, I have booked a table in the restaurant. Ferdinand opened the trunk and stuffed the suitcase in. Seeing him struggling, Wade wanted to use the levitation spell for a moment, but then he thought that he had left school, so he had to suppress this impulse. Wade, I heard some outrageous rumors in the leaky cauldron. After eating and drinking, Fiona couldn't wait to say, that can't be true, right? I mean, about one of your professors being a puppet of the Dark Lord, and your school has hidden a stone that can make people immortal. Wade raised his eyes and saw Ferdinand looking at him silently. The Philosopher's Stone is real, Wade said. Mr. Nick Flamel and his wife have lived for 6 centuries relying on the elixir of immortality. Oh my God, Fiona said in a trance. I have seen him in fantasy novels. I didn't expect that he is still alive. I don't know what it feels like to be immortal. She looked very yearning. In fact, you can only live forever, not age. So, Wade spread his hands and let his mother imagine it. The image of the immortal, mysterious and handsome wizard collapsed suddenly, and Fiona's mind outlined a gray-haired, chicken-skinned, toothless and hairless appearance. But the oldest person she had ever seen was only over 100 years old. Fiona didn't know what an old man over 660 years old should look like. Her imagination began to gradually extend towards the image of Cthulhu. Ferdinand noticed the part that Wade had omitted, and his heart suddenly sank. When Fiona returned home in the evening, she went to wash up. Ferdinand gestured, and the father and son went to the balcony. So, that thing is true too. Ferdinand played with a lighter, but did not light a cigarette, but asked about the rumors of the mysterious man. Wade hesitated for a moment, wondering whether he should tell his father the truth. Ferdinand saw it, and felt a little heavy, and forced a smile. Don't tell me, the truth is stranger than the rumors. Vader finally made up his mind. It's like this, the one who sneaked into Hogwarts was not Fudi, the mysterious man's puppet, but the mysterious man himself. He did not die completely, but possessed Quirrell's body in the state of a wandering spirit. Considering most people's fear of Voldemort's name, Vader consciously did not mention that name in front of others. Ferdinand's hand shook and he almost dropped the lighter. He isn't dead, he asked with a pale face. Yes, but that person's hiding ability was not good enough. Dumbledore discovered it from the beginning, so the situation was always under his control. Wade said in a relaxed tone, you should have heard that Quirrell was finally defeated by the first-year Harry Potter. In fact, it was not Quirrell who failed again, but the mysterious man. Ferdinand was silent for a long time, until he heard the sound of sliding the door from the bathroom. He was about to go back to the living room, but when he opened the door, he suddenly turned back and said, Wade. You have learned magic now, it is impossible to become obscurus again. Have you ever thought? Ferdinand seemed to have a particularly difficult time speaking. Vader waited quietly. Do you want to go to the United States? Or Australia? Ferdinand said. I heard that there is also a good magic academy in the United States. Maybe they are willing to accept transfer students. Wade was silent for a moment and then said, I'm sorry, Dad. Okay, Ferdinand sighed. I'm really not surprised at all. But you can make some preparations in advance. Wade added, if the situation becomes very dangerous one day in the future, I hope you and your mother can move there first. Silly boy. Ferdinand smiled helplessly. How could we leave you, and hide in a safe place alone? If I am in danger, I will go. Wade said with a smile. You know, wizards can apparate. I plan to learn this magic in the 2nd grade, and it will be easier to escape. In the first week of summer vacation, Wade finished all his homework. It was easy for him, all the required knowledge was in his head, and he could complete most of the papers without even flipping through the books. On the morning of the 8th day, Professor Murray's son Stephen appeared outside the door. Because there were no pedestrians on the road at this time, he apparated directly to the neighborhood instead of emerging from the fireplace of Wade's house. Early in the morning, there was a sudden knock on the door. Ferdinand opened the door and saw a big man standing outside. Hello, Mr. Gray. I'm Stephen Murray. Is Vader here? The big man smiled cheerfully. Of course, please come in. Ferdinand stepped away from the door, with a little doubt in his eyes. Most of the wizards he had met did not wear Muggle clothes, but the man in front of him was very well dressed. Stephen Murray. Ferdinand heard Wade mention this person. I don't know why, but he always has the image of a fat guy in his mind, but he looks like a basketball player in person. Hi Stephen, long time no see. Wade came down from upstairs and raised his hand to say hello. Vede, I'm here to pick you up and take you to the Alpine Manor. Stephen's smile suddenly spread to the corners of his eyes, and he said, I guess you are ready. Certainly. Wade picked up the pencil case on the cabinet and stuffed it into his pocket. After saying goodbye to his parents, the two left Gray's house together. The cold morning light shone on the streets, and the windows of most houses were still dark. The mist made the distant street scenes appear blurry. How do we get there? Wade asked. Before I went out, my father told me not to disapparate with you to avoid danger. Stephen raised his wand. So there's only one option, the night bus. With a loud bang, a 3-story bus seemed to be squeezed out of the air, the lights in front of it emitting a dazzling light. Wouldn't such a loud noise wake up the Muggles? Vader was startled and asked speechlessly. No, there's a shielding spell cast on the car. Muggles generally can't hear or see it. Stephen said. Generally, haha. You are really sharp. Stephen couldn't help but laugh. Occasionally some Muggles will notice this bus, but they usually think it's because they are dazzled. Welcome aboard the night bus. Just stick out your wand and step on board and we'll take you wherever you want to go. My name is Stan Sampak, and I'm your conductor tonight. A thin young man leaned half out of the car door. After babbled a long series of opening remarks, he seemed to see the two people waiting on the roadside. Please get in the car, you two. What are you waiting for? Sampak said enthusiastically. Waiting to see when you give me a chance to speak. 11 silvers for each person, right? Stephen took Wade to the car and handed Sampak a gold galleons and several silver psychors at the same time. Would you like some chocolate, sir? Just 2 more silver sickles per piece. Sampak asked loudly and pulled the door hard. No, thank you. Go to Alpine Manor, Stephen said. Yes, sir, Sampak shouted back. Wade looked at the interior of the bus. There were several beds with brass pillars in the bus, and the curtains were drawn on the windows next to them. Candles were lit on the shelf next to the bed, bringing a faint source of light into the car. Only one bed had a passenger. The man wore an old nightcap and covered himself tightly with the quilt. He only made even breathing sounds. The conductor's loud voice didn't seem to affect him at all. Go to sleep, Vader. Stephen chose a bed and lay down on it, warning, this bus is very wild. Vader followed the advice. Sampak raised his eyebrows. Speed is a man's romance. Thank you, but I hope this romance is gentler. Stephen complained. Before he finished speaking, the whole bus jumped like a frog and suddenly jumped so far away that Wade almost rolled off the bed. He immediately took out his wand and cast a temporary sticking spell on his clothes, which finally prevented him from being shaken upside down by the bus afterwards. Wow, student, you're violating Ministry of Magic bans. Sampak said, then chuckled himself. Stephen asked, will you report it to the Ministry of Magic? Of course, no. Sampak pinched his mouth and said in a weird voice, my mouth is as solid as a permanent sticking spell. The driver driving in front also said, sir, we have professional ethics, Sampak, don't joke around. Copy that, Earn. Sampak raised his hand and made a gesture in front of his forehead. Although the night bus drove wildly, it was very fast. It didn't take long for it to arrive outside the Jiaojun Manor. Stephen and Wade stepped out of the car together, and the iron door of the manor slid open silently, then closed automatically after the two of them entered. Compared with ordinary Muggle manors, Wizards' manors are very quiet, because Muggles need at least 50 or 60 servants to maintain a manor of this size. But Wizards don't need to. House elves can do all the grunt work. Actually, I would like to invite you to my farm, Alsaphila Manor, which is a bit too quiet. Stephen said, but my father said that he would give you a few days of alchemy lessons first. Wade asked, don't you have to go to Mr. Scamander's place? Mr. Scamander gave me a 2-week summer vacation. Stephen said happily, After you finish your classes, we will go to the farm to play for 2 days. After the vacation, we will go to Dorsetshire. Mr. Scamander said that he welcomes your visit. Wade is also looking forward to it. According to Stephen, there are more than a dozen house elves serving at Alsophila Manor, but Wade has never seen them once. The food here is also richer than the cafeteria at Hogwarts. Although the long table in the school auditorium is always full, there are usually large plates of baked potatoes, fried steaks, roast chickens, cakes, etc. It cannot be said that it is not rich, but you will always get tired of eating too much in the school cafeteria. Alsophila Manor is different. Professor Murray traveled all over the world when he was young, and now he often goes to other countries to attend conferences, exchange alchemical products, and even attend new product launches of Muggles in disguise. Therefore, he also introduced the cuisines of various countries to the Alsophila Manor: Peking duck, Brazilian barbecue, Singaporean chili crab, Spanish ham, Mexican burritos. The recipes provided in the cafeteria alone are a 2-inch thick booklet. And you can also order food. Choose what you want to eat in advance, and the house elves will deliver it to the table silently within half an hour. At noon, Professor Murray came back from outside. He didn't spend much time on greetings and started teaching Wade. You have mastered all the basics of alchemy. Professor Murray said bluntly. This summer we will learn something special: biological alchemy. Biological alchemy. Wade thought of the walking tin can man for a moment, and then he recalled what he had learned from the book, just like the sorting hat and wizard chess. Professor Murray smiled. Wizard chess and the sorting hat look similar, but they are actually completely different. He raised his finger, and a box lid on the table opened. Black and white chess pieces lined up and walked out of it, arguing and standing on the chessboard. The White Queen stared at Wade very dissatisfiedly. Hurry up and play chess, is there any command? The knight on the other side shouted, let me charge. I want to break the opponent's army. Professor Murray nodded, and the chess pieces immediately quieted down. This is wizard chess, Professor Murray said. Sometimes it gives people the illusion that they also have life and thoughts. In fact, this is not the case. Do you know why? Wade thought about it carefully. He didn't play chess very often, but because these chess pieces were very interesting, he also collected a set, and let them fight on the chessboard when he was bored. The more you observe, the more you will find that these seemingly lively chess pieces actually behave very rigidly. They always show similar personalities and say similar things. Occasionally there will be some changes, but they themselves have not grown, and they will not learn from failures. That's right, so these are just toys pretending to have thoughts. Professor Murray put the chess pieces back into the box and said, injecting thoughts into inanimate objects, making things like mirrors, measuring tapes, and flying brooms seem to have their own ideas, is just low-level biological alchemy. But the sorting hat is different. If you communicate with it a few more times, you will find that the guy is actually very thoughtful. It is really thinking independently and making its own judgments, instead of rigidly choosing students according to the ideas of the 4 founders. Wade gritted his teeth when he thought of being rejected by the sorting hat. That's right, that guy is not only thoughtful, but also very weird. But the sorting hat is not a real life. It has a brain, but it cannot reproduce and does not metabolize. Real biological alchemy, in ancient times it was actually called life alchemy, is the ability to create real life forms, and you are no stranger to the most successful works. Guess, Wade, what is that? Wade lowered his head and thought. Biological alchemy, real life forms, able to reproduce on their own, successful works. He has learned a lot about magical creatures from books, but he has rarely come into contact with them. After a moment, Wade raised his head and said affirmatively, house elves. Professor Murray smiled with satisfaction. Yes, it is a house elf. Legend has it that the ancient wizards felt that life was inconvenient because they were far away from people, so various elves were born from nature. Golandlin helps craftsmen improve their skills and make tools. Dwarf elves provide help for farms, and some even help people make shoes. Wine cellar spirits help people manage food and wine, but they also steal wine themselves. Cobb will help milk cows, pick eggs, and clean the yard. Brown elves help people do housework with extraordinary speed and efficiency, but if they are paid, they will disappear forever. At the same time, because of the evil thoughts of wizards, many bad elves were born from swamps, tree roots, and dark forests. Quote, goblins create disasters, red hats hunt for blood, magic spirits make animals sick, pixie makes people lost, and burdock scares children at night. Some of these elves have become legends, and we don't know if they really exist, but some, you can learn about them in the Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Wade nodded. There are red hats in the 3rd grade textbook. Are house elves the descendants of those good elves? Excluding the part where the whole world is centered on wizards, those legends in the magic world are likely to be true even if they sound beyond imagination. Descendants is too mild, Wade. Professor Murray said. To be precise, the ancient wizards used extreme means to strip away the parts of the elves that were not good for humans, such as laziness, theft, mischief, and dignity. The first house elves were born from experiments. But their magic power is too weak, their work efficiency is greatly reduced, and they are often even harmed by livestock. So the ancient wizards made some changes to them, integrating the blood of the goblins, so that the house elves also have powerful magic. But the goblins don't seem to regard the house elves as their own kind. Wade asked. Of course not, Professor Murray said slowly. The goblins are very proud. In their eyes, house elves are lowly creatures and are not worthy of being called their own kind. After the house elves have powerful magic, they are no longer willing to be enslaved by wizards. Their predecessors, such as brown elves and dwarf elves, like to work for wizards, but they are proud creatures. If they feel insulted, they will even harbor malice towards their masters. Wade nodded and said, that's why there is a record of the elf rebellion in the history of magic. More than half of the wars between wizards and alien races in History of Magic came from goblins, so many students did not pay attention to the subtle difference in the expression and regarded the Goblin Rebellion and the Elf Rebellion as the same thing. Yes, Professor Murray sighed. Although the number of times is not large, the house elves have also rebelled several times. Wizards are reluctant to completely destroy this kind of creation, so they can only transform their thoughts and erase their personalities again and again, and plant the mark of absolute obedience in their minds, so that they are willing to be enslaved by wizards. Thus, the most ideal slaves were domesticated. But there is only one thing, rooted in the soul of this creature, which wizards cannot eliminate no matter what, that is, life is born with a yearning for freedom. So wizards and house elves have an unchangeable contract. When the master gives them clothes, they will be free. But Wade remembered the attitude of the elves towards freedom in the original plot, and the exiled elf named Sparkling. Almost all the elves I know hate freedom. If they are exiled by their masters, they will feel very humiliated and miserable. Yes, miserable. Professor Murray's smile was somewhat sarcastic. The exiled house elves are free. They can go anywhere, including the home of their original owner. But look, have any exiled elves returned? Vader was stunned. After Shining was exiled by her master, she was in agony, drank and cried bitterly, but did she try to go back? Later, Barty Crouch and his son came and went in Hogwarts for the Triwizard Tournament. What was Winky doing? Did she ever want to go and help her original owner who had been cast by the Imperious Curse? And other elves who were expelled or were inadvertently given freedom by their owners, will they try to return to their original owners and resume their employment? Or, will they throw themselves on the ground and cry bitterly, and then accept this fact and go wandering? Although Vader knew many house elves, they all belong to Hogwarts. Most of them are very satisfied with their current lives. None of them say they yearn for freedom, and they have never been expelled. Including Zoe and McGee. They just want to be treated well and respected by the wizard, but they have no intention of being free. Professor Murray did not stay on this topic for long. After nodding at Vader, he said, after successful precedents, many wizards became keen on life alchemy. But this is not an easy task. Many people have been killed by their own creations, and life alchemy has gradually become a forbidden art. But what really made this magic completely banned was the birth of another creature. In the 15th century, a wizard named Extus built a castle on an island, and then lured Muggle ships to the island. He did extremely terrible things to the Muggle sailors and crew. Quote, it is said that the people who were ordered to investigate there later came back, and refused to talk about what they found there. And the least horrifying part of it is that the place has become a safe haven for Dementors. And that's Azkaban. Dementors feed on happiness, and people will feel depressed and hopeless just by being close to them. They can also suck away human souls and turn people into walking zombies like them. The effective way to deal with them is the patron saint, curse. This kind of creature cannot be completely killed. Even if it dies temporarily, it will breed again from the decayed and dark place. They are beyond life and death. The immortality that humans dream of, Dementors have had it since their birth. So to a certain extent, this kind of life alchemy can be said to be extremely successful, but it is of no benefit to wizards. Vader suddenly had a question. Professor, wizards can use the Patronus charm to resist Dementors, but Muggles can't even see such creatures, let alone resist them. Well, yes, Professor Murray asked. Are you worried that this kind of monster will harm your parents? At the beginning of the 18th century, the Ministry of Magic made an agreement with the Dementors, allowing them to guard the prisoners in Azkaban and not allow them to leave. Quote, although I always think this is a stupid decision. But so far, it seems that the results are pretty good. Vader shook his head and said softly, no, I actually want to ask, why didn't the Wiccan Party and Death Eaters use the power of Dementors during the Wizarding War? Professor Murray was stunned, and then said after a moment, because to Dementors, wizards' magical souls are much more attractive than Muggles, and there are actually very few wizards who can use the Patronus charm. He slowed down and said, the story almost ends here. I think you should understand, the alchemy of life can be said to be both wonderful and dangerous. It allows wizards to create species that transcend their own life levels. Every life alchemy is a process that cannot be replicated. There are no identical humans in the world, and there are no identical alchemical lives. Creating life is the authority of gods, but wizards can steal a small part of this authority. This kind of temptation is unparalleled. As long as an alchemist with some ability will take this path sooner or later. No matter how much the Ministry of Magic prohibits it, there will always be wizards who will try to explore the restricted area of life. I just hope that when you start to be interested in alchemical life one day, you can remember what we said today, remember those examples of failure, and remember what I taught you. Imagine boldly and verify carefully. On the road of alchemy, you can never be too cautious. Of course, what we are going to learn today is still the most basic part, how to give thoughts to inanimate objects. Professor Murray's bioalchemy class only lasted 3 days, and then he gave Wade a few books and a bunch of alchemy materials so that he could slowly understand it through practice. After dinner, Stephen invited Wade to his farm. If you have friends who are good at playing, you can also invite them over. There are many interesting animals on my farm, which are very popular with children. Stephen said. Wade asked, wouldn't it be too disturbing? No, there are some little ones who love children and they will be happy. Stephen joked. If you have a girl you like, this is a great opportunity. Wade said slowly. I'm only 12 years old, what kind of love is this? That's right, Professor Murray nodded approvingly. You should study hard when you are in school and don't be distracted by these things. But you. He suddenly looked at Stephen and said angrily, when will you get a girlfriend? Do you still plan to live with a bird and a snake for the rest of your life? Stephen shrank his neck and muttered in a low voice, you told me the same thing when I was in school. But my classmates who had girlfriends in school all got married after graduation. You have graduated from Hogwarts for 20 years. In such a long time, if you didn't stay on the farm all day, you could have had 8 relationships. Didn't the daughter of the Shafiq family keep looking at you and smiling at you at the last banquet? Didn't you try to keep in touch with her? Stephen was stunned for a while and said blankly, someone from the Shafiq family came last time. Professor Murray glared at him, and Stephen immediately stopped talking. Finally, seeing that Wade was there, Professor Murray didn't continue to scold his son. After dinner, Stephen pulled Wade and took him upstairs to pack his luggage. Upstairs, Stephen said with a bitter face, let's go quickly. Otherwise, when my father remembers, he will definitely scold me again. Wade had no objection. He took out the pencil case and silently cast a spell, and the pencil case unfolded and became the size of a school bag. Wade stuffed books, alchemical materials and some personal belongings into it. Then the school bag returned to the size of a pencil case. This is the advantage of the bird snake skin. When Wade got it, it looked only the size of a caterpillar, but it could stretch to a very large size. So Wade folded it 7 times, making it present different sizes. The smallest is the pencil case, which is also the only one that has not been cast with the traceless extension spell. The largest is the wardrobe, and there is a wider space inside. Another advantage of the traceless extension spell is that no matter how many items are put into it, it is like putting them into another space, and the user always feels only the weight of the box itself. So he can put it in his pocket and walk around casually. Look at me, I almost forgot about this. Seeing Wade's pencil case, Stephen patted his head and walked out of the bedroom quickly. After a while, he came back with a brown bag and said, "Birds and snakes are very sensitive to the smell of their own kind. You have to put your pencil case in this bag, otherwise you may be attacked by the birds and snakes on the farm." Okay. Wade took the bag and looked at the combination of magic words and spells on it out of habit. Is this the work of Professor Murray? Yeah. How did you tell? Stephen asked strangely. Everyone's alchemy works have their own style. If you are familiar with them, you can tell them at a glance. Wade explained. Stephen, is there any obvious difference between this brown deerskin bag and the ones sold in stores? He didn't understand it, but he was used to not getting too entangled in areas that he was not good at. From Alpenia Manor, you can fly directly to Growling Farm. Stephen's farm is named Growling, a kind of flying horse, and his longing is simply palpable. In the morning, Wade stretched out in the sun and heard his bones seeming to crack. He walked along the path between the red brick huts, stretching his muscles. It was already dark when we arrived at the farm last night. After washing up, Wade went to sleep in the guest room. Only today did he have time to take a good look at the farm. Different from the gorgeous castle of Jiaocheng Manor, the buildings on the farm only have a dozen red brick huts. At first glance, it seems like you have arrived in a remote small village in ancient times. The farm is surrounded by mountains and rivers, with great scenery and incredibly fresh air. Some simple fences, shrubs and fir trees divide the farm into large and small areas, dotted with wild grass and colorful flowers, making it look quiet and beautiful. Glaring Farm, like all places where wizards live, is cast under concealment spells and banishment spells, and does not exist on Muggle maps at all. Therefore, it has not been given the smell of steel and gasoline by the rapid development of modern technology. This place where humans rarely set foot is simply a paradise for animals. Among the leaves, blue birds flew happily to and fro without making any sound. A teardrop-shaped nest was hidden among the thorns, and a vulture-like bird poked its head out of it. It folded its dark green wings and had a sad expression on its face. Some green guys that look like frogs and lizards squat on the branches or hide under the leaves. They have devilish smiles on their faces, a red pustule on their head, and their mouths are full of sharp teeth. They don't look very good, friendly. This is a tree monkey frog, Stephen said, walking over from behind Wade. He stretched out his hand, and the tree monkey frog, which originally looked evil, jumped onto his hand, and its long lizard-like tail gently curled around his thumb. Stephen touched his head and said, "If they feel danger, the pustules on their heads will flash red. So their pus is one of the raw materials for making speculum." He put his palm close to the branch and shook his arm slightly. The tree monkey frog jumped over and quickly disappeared among the leaves. A bowtruckle was stepped on by a tree monkey frog. It moved slowly, and the leaves above its head trembled slightly. "It's really interesting here," Vader said. "I'm starting to understand why you want to be a magical biologist." "Yeah, this world is rich and colorful because of their existence." Stephen sighed softly and said, "But there are fewer and fewer habitats suitable for magical creatures, and it is becoming more and more difficult to protect them. Even a fire dragon will not be spared if it is discovered by Muggles. So I want to do my best to protect them and provide them with an undisturbed living space. I also hope that more people will realize that protecting magical creatures is important and interesting." "It's a great ideal," Wade said. "If there's anything I can do to help, just say it." Stephen smiled happily. "When I need it, I will definitely ask for help without hesitation." Considering. He suddenly fell silent and looked at Wade's back. There was a strange snapping sound among the leaves, and a large number of birds chirped and flapped their wings and all flew up. Vader turned around and saw a blue-gray behemoth with a diameter of at least 3 meters slowly sliding through the forest. If you look closely, you will see that its body is not touching the ground at all, but actually flying in the air. Don't be afraid, this is a bird snake. You know, it doesn't eat people. Stephen pressed Wade's shoulder and said softly, "It's a little timid, just don't disturb it." The bird snake suddenly jumped out, like an eagle's beak biting a blue bird. It stretched its neck and swallowed, and soon its body shrank to the size of an ordinary python. Then it swam along the gaps between the trees, and finally circled to a tall pine tree. Its body shrunk even smaller, and finally it was hidden under a leaf, almost invisible. "Let's go," Stephen said, "it's going to take a while to digest." After walking some distance, Wade said, "I thought you would stop it from hunting the silent bird." Stephen shook his head. Protecting magical creatures does not mean keeping them in captivity with enough food. I just want to prevent them from being harmed by humans, but the hunting relationship between them should not be forcibly changed. Wade nodded secretly and asked, "It costs a lot to maintain such a farm, right? If you need funds, I can provide part of it. The galleons in the treasury are increasing every second, and there is no use in leaving them empty. It would be better to use them for something meaningful." "It's not necessary yet," Stephen smiled and said. "The house elves will collect the feathers, scales, replacement snake sloughs, fallen horns, etc. that magical creatures usually shed, and sell them for a large sum. The money is enough to maintain the farm." He showed a proud smile like a child. "Don't look at me like this. I am a rich man. I only need my father's support for the first 2 years after the farm was established, and then I can be self-sufficient." "How many magical creatures are raised here?" Wade asked curiously. Stephen was immediately stumped. He thought for a while before saying, "There are always 20 or 30 species. But I can't say for sure. Because there are always some creatures that quietly move in when I don't pay attention. Creatures that have just arrived are always more wary. Sometimes they have brought their family with them, and I will find some hidden traces. If they don't cause damage, I usually don't care. But magical creatures that have lived for a long time, such as those tree monkey frogs, will regard Stephen as their companion or even protector, and will be very close to him." Vader imagined his life, and even though he didn't have such a deep love for magical creatures, he still had some yearning in his heart. Stephen checked the time and said, "Your friends should be arriving soon. Let's go over there to greet them. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more."